Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Been having some heavy ones on here lately, right? And this week's no different. We got a two-part series with a former Delta Force operator who was on the Saddam Hussein raid, which eventually led to Saddam's execution, which is exactly what needed to happen to that human being. Please like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Please head over to Spotify and Apple Podcast. Leave us a review, subscribe there as well. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chris VanSant, former Delta operator, to the Shawn Ryan Show. Love you all. This is a heavy one, and it's important. A lot of history here. Enjoy it. One last thing. Merch, gummy bears, all that good stuff is about to be back in stock. We have a thing we call the Shawn Ryan Show newsletter. Go to the description, click the link below, sign up for the newsletter, because that's how you get notified when all this good stuff comes to the market. All right, love you guys. Cheers. Chris VanSant, welcome to the show, man.
Hey man, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I apologize. I think I'm fighting off a little something, so my voice is a little odd, but I'll do my best.
No worries at all. If you need to take a break, we'll take a break.
Appreciate it.
But a whole career in special operations, Army special operations, out of the unit. Now you're doing business consulting. You're really involved in the All Secure Foundation. I want to touch on that at the end. Actually, I want to do more than touch on that. I want to talk about what they're doing. But for this interview, I mean, you're just a really inspiring guy. I'm inspired by, I know my audience is going to be inspired. And a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge. A lot of guys coming out are looking up to people like you. And there's just a lot of knowledge to give. And so I want to kind of start off with childhood, why you got into the military, what your military career was like, and then get into some of the obstacles that you've overcome outside of the military as a civilian, and we'll kind of go from there. But real quick, at breakfast this morning, we were having a conversation about whatever you want to call it, the universe, and
or 25 conversations.
Yeah, and things coming back to you, you know, if you inject good in this world, things coming back, shouting things out into the universe, and then they happened. And, you know, it happened again right there at breakfast for me. I've been having, I think, maybe some heart problems and probably something I need to get checked out, a lot of heartburn. And my wife actually brought it up at dinner last night, you know, that could be something a lot more serious. You've been having a lot of heartburn. I'll be damned. 12 hours later, sitting at breakfast with you, and the very first conversation we have is that you just had 3 stents put in because they found some blockages. And these kind of things happen to me all the time. A positive one would be when I got engaged to my wife. I got engaged to her in Alaska, and I wanted to do it under the Northern Lights, not knowing there were seasons for that, not knowing anything. And we went there in August to do something with this guy, Jeff Reed. We did some content there and bringing out his story. And I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, dude, the Northern Lights do not come out
In August.
in August.
Yeah.
And sure as shit, second day there, we had rented an Airbnb. I was going to pick the film crew up, and Jeff texted me. He's like, "You're not going to believe this shit. The Northern Lights are on like full blast
For
right
like
now."
once in a, yeah, because every now and then they have an event, yeah.
Yep. And I was like, shit, I got to go pick the fucking film crew up. So I go pick the film crew up. They flew on separate flights. Second guy's flight got delayed. And he's like, you better hurry up and do it, because these things are usually out for like 10, 15 minutes and then they're gone. They must have been out for 4 hours, because I brought one of them back to the Airbnb, went to pick the other one, brought him back. The second guy just got back from Europe. He wanted to talk all about his trip to Europe, and I'm like, I gotta get engaged. I gotta get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
And so took off in the car, had no idea where I was gonna do it. Probably drove around for an hour. Finally found a park. By that time, it's like 1:30, 2 in the morning. We're freezing our asses off. And she just wants to go to bed. And I get out of the car with the ring, and the fucking Northern Lights are gone. And I'm standing there. She's passed out in the passenger seat. And I'm like, please just give me fucking 5. Anybody up there, just pull some strings for me. I need 5 fucking minutes just to get this done. Like, we just had 4 or 5 hours of Northern Lights. I shit you not, man. Right back on. They came, went over, grabbed my wife out of the car, and
Woke her up.
yep. Hey, wake up. And we got engaged right there under the Northern Lights. And right after we got engaged, the entire sky lit up. And it was just like, have you ever seen them?
No, not in person, just videos. I've been in Alaska in the winter, didn't see him. I've been to Iceland, but we were there in the summer, didn't see him. So it's always been something I wanted to do, so I get it.
Yeah. So just total magical. And, but you can't chalk that up as a coincidence.
Nope.
And, so I was just wondering if you want to share anything specifically. I know sometimes they're subtle for me, sometimes they're overpowering like that. But you got anything?
Yeah, I mean, I've said for years, like, the universe talks to you and you have to pay attention. I think I've got better at listening as the years have gone by. But, like, this heart stuff is a great example. I've always known, so grandfather, father, brother, all had either heart attacks or open heart surgery in their 40s. So I've always been aware of the family history. But like most guys, particularly guys from the community, you know, I've not been the best about, you know, like going to the doctor and taking care of myself. I sort of did what we had to do to remain deployable, or whatever they used to call it. But so now fast forward, you know, to post-career, when I got out of the service, I had some back-to-back blood tests that showed that my cholesterol was high. So I made an appointment, went to see a cardiologist. I was proactive. When I tried to go get referred out to a cardiologist in the beginning, they were like, no, you're a young guy, you're healthy, you're in shape, like, you're not going to have any heart problems. Why do you need to see a cardiologist? And I was like, no, you don't understand. And I literally had to like fight for myself, but I knew that was a thing. And so eventually I ended up seeing one, got on some cholesterol medication, and you know, did a stress test every 2 years or so. And everything was fine. My cholesterol levels were good. Everything was good. But I was at work this past year, or just the year prior, and I started noticing that I felt funny. And it wasn't chest pain. It wasn't pain in my left arm. It wasn't heartburn, which is what my dad had when, you know, the precursor to his heart attack was heartburn. Not to freak you out, but something was going on, and I felt like something wasn't right. And so I listened, because too many times in my life, you know, the universe has said things and I haven't heard it, or I hadn't paid attention to it. And then after the fact, you realize, man, there were these signs that I should have paid attention to. But I paid attention to it. I won't say fully, but at least enough that I said these things to my wife. And between the two of us, we agreed that, you know, I needed to get checked out. Well, it ended up turning into a blood pressure spike. I ended up in the ER. They found nothing, told me there was nothing. But, you know, the two of us both were like, we need to pay attention to what's going on. So we pressed the issue, went to see a cardiologist, ended up with a cardiac CT. And lo and behold, I, you know, just like grandfather, father, brother, I ended up with some heart disease issues. So I had three blockages that were fairly substantial. Luckily for me, modern medical science is absolutely incredible. Over a space of about 6 weeks, I had a couple different heart procedures. But again, it's about listening and paying attention. And then furthermore, like that, in that course of events, which was just, 6-7 months ago, I'd been in a career for 7 years post-service. It was great, working for a great company. But, had a certain amount of stress, which was part of the equation. And because I know I need to pay attention to those signs, I said, what, I think I need to make a change. So I did. So 7 months ago, I punched out of what I was doing and stepped away after 7 years and decided to take a little break, and then started a consulting company, mainly because I love the defense industry. I love the end users that we support. And I felt like I had some knowledge and experience that maybe could help some companies, get good, innovative stuff in the guys' hands. So
It's crazy how one thing will lead right into the next. Are you happier now?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you realize with any profession, as time goes on, as your duties and responsibilities increase, I don't think you realize the weight that you carry around until it's not there. So, there was an inherent amount of stress that comes with growth and chasing the next thing as a company in the defense space. And, we went from a few people to a lot of people, and it just wore on me. I think it was time for a change. So yes, I did. I felt lighter almost instantly, and I'm sure there's a myriad of reasons that went into that. I don't even begin to try or understand all of them, but I know that I definitely felt better, and it was the right choice.
Yeah. Well, every guest that comes on the show gets a present. So
Sweet.
Here's your gift.
Thank you, sir.
You got any guesses?
It's heavy.
It's got some weight to it.
It's got some weight.
Yeah. You want a hint?
Yeah.
I'll let you ask a question.
One question.
Yeah, one hint.
Is it food?
Yes.
That's
All right,
no.
you can ask another one. It's legal in all 50 states. Believe it or not.
It's food, and it's legal in all 50 states.
You'll see when you open it. Go ahead, rip it open.
Why does legality of food have to be a thing? Oh, sweet. Gummy bears.
That's right.
So you don't know me other than what we've gotten to know each other, but my wife will tell you, like, I'm a candy hound.
Me too.
Like late at night, she's gone to bed and I'm watching TV. I'll bust out the gummy bears, the gummy worms. Yeah, totally.
That's right.
Thing. Awesome, dude. I appreciate that.
Not to contribute to your heart disease, but,
It's zero fat. There's no cholesterol in gummy bears.
right on.
Thanks, brother.
My pleasure. But, yeah, let's just dive right in. Let's start with childhood. Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in Dover, Delaware. The first state. A kind of a normal upbringing. I lived in the central part of the state, which is, a lot of rural farmland, small community, kind of everybody knows everybody. It's grown over the years, but it's still kind of the same. I can go home and go in the grocery store and see somebody I know, all these years later. Childhood divorce, but I say that for two reasons. One is to make people aware, but two, to say that, mine wasn't that bad. It had its moments, but both my parents remarried when I was fairly young. I think I was 8 or 9 years old by the time they'd both remarried, and I ended up with two other good sets of people in my life. My step-parents on both sides were every bit as much a part of my upbringing and my character and who I am as my mom and dad. Like, I say that as a positive. I think I had some fairly decent role models as a young kid growing up. So, played sports. Baseball was probably my primary thing. My dad was a college baseball coach at the time. I think I was competitive from a very young age.
Were you good at it?
I was a good ball player. I think that's where a lot of my competitiveness comes from. Was you didn't just want to be good at it. You wanted to be good enough to make the All-Star team at the end of the year, so you could keep playing ball. Like, there were a myriad of reasons, but but yeah, I think a lot of my competitive drive and things like that came from athletics as a child. But yeah, in moving into my teens, early teens, I probably was a little misbehaved. I think some of it was just where I was. You know, it's Delaware. There's not a lot of stuff to do. It's not like we had a big city or we didn't have mountains. You know, we had the beach in the summer. But for the most part, you know, as a teenage boy, you're just looking for something to do to pass the time. So
how are you misbehaving?
I think I started drinking pretty early. Just getting into trouble. You know, back then you didn't, if you did something stupid as a kid in the state of Delaware, when in that time frame, cops just drove you home. You know, they knew your parents or they were connected somehow. So you didn't get arrested or charged with things. You just sort of got taken home. So I think I was fortunate in that respect. But yeah, I you know, kind of survived all that. But getting into a little bit of mischief and being a handful for my mom in particular, love you, Mom. I knew that I needed some structure in my life. So towards the tail end of high school, really my junior year, I think, is when I started looking at the military as an option. And it was for a myriad of reasons. One was because I needed some structure. Two was, as much as I wanted to go off to college and continue to play baseball, I felt like I was going to piss it away, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Like that I think I was aware enough that I didn't have the self-discipline that I would have ended up screwing it up. And I didn't want to do that. And then I had military in the family. Both my grandfathers, my mom and dad's side, both served in World War II. And I always say my mom's grandfather, he was in the Army Air Corps, but he was in the Pacific Theater most of his time. Spent like 4 years during World War II overseas.
Oh, wow.
Which is a pretty substantial amount of time. Got into some trouble while he was in the service, you know, typical young service member thing, particularly in a time of war. But I got him, I was the youngest of all the grandkids on that side of the family, and I got him at a point in his life where he started to open up as an old man and tell some stories. And
shit.
And I just happened to be like the one grandkid that was still around. So, you know, you're sick from school, you go to your grandparents. It's a weekend and your parents are going away doing something, you go to your grandparents. So I ended up spending quite a bit of time with him at a point in his life when he started to share some of those things. So I got a lot of stories from World War II, probably some stuff I shouldn't have heard at the age that I was. But as I've said before, he talked about that stuff, the good and the bad, with such reverence. Like it was such a part of who he was. And we're talking whatever that was, you know, 50 years later or 40 years later or whatever, that I think it stuck with me. I think that pride of having served your country in a time of need, the people that were around him when he was in the service and what they meant to him, and his time spent, even though it led to some tough times afterwards, it was just so important to him. And I think that had an impact on me, and it's why I ended up in the Army.
Did you have siblings?
I did. I had an older brother. I do. I have an older brother that's 8 years older than me. So I sort of grew up like an only child, because, you know, by the time I was, I don't know, I guess I was 10 years old, my brother was moving on to college. So
Interesting.
And then my parents remarried, and then my father had another child, my half sister, with my stepmom, and she's almost 10 years younger than me. So big, widespread, 3 different people. My brother's awesome, but we're like, I think because of that spread, we are polar opposites. Like we're 2 just different people.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I got a theory, but it seems like the majority of guys that wind up in some type of career in special operations are always the oldest.
Oh, weird.
But yeah, the majority of them from the people that I've interviewed are, but that makes sense. 8-year gap. You don't see a lot of close like siblings where the younger ones join.
Yeah.
But were you drawn to combat coming out of high school, or?
I think I was. Nobody's ever asked me that. I don't know that I thought about it like that.
Or maybe not combat. Were you drawn to being some type of a commando or at a high level?
Oh, absolutely.
You
Yeah.
were.
So, I mean, all jokes aside, we all laugh about this, but, you know, I grew up in the 80s. You know, there were some good movies back then.
Yeah.
you know, and a couple of them in that stretch were like the Navy SEAL movie with Charlie Sheen, the Delta Force movie with Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin, you know, the old John Wayne, the Green Berets. Like, yeah, I think I was influenced by some of that. But also the point I was going to make was, you know, all my grandfather's stories about being in the service were about being at war.
No kidding.
You know, it wasn't like he had any like peacetime stories. Like they were all World War II, overseas, deployed at war. So that was my frame of reference, I think, from an early age was that's why you go do that. Because when the time comes, you need to go over there and do the best you can for your country. And I think that, so yeah, I think it was definitely on my mind. And then trying to come in the service, yes, I had done some research. You know, we didn't have the internet back then, but it was, you know, there were books and things that had been written. And I think I did some homework and kind of found all the information I could. I had a buddy in school whose brother, I wouldn't say a buddy, but there's a guy that I knew that had a brother that was an Air Force combat controller. And so at one point, we were talking and I had expressed some interest in going in the service and he was telling me about this thing in the Air Force. And I was like, wow. And I was in Dover, Delaware, so it was an Air Force town. I'd never even thought about joining the Air Force. Like it just wasn't like I wanted to be a gun-toting, you know, infantryman or Airborne Ranger or whatever. But he gave me the, it was, you know, it was like that old dot matrix printed, but it was the CCT pipeline, the CCT and PJ pipeline and all the training that they go through. And I was like, wow, like that. Well, I get to jump out of planes and scuba dive and sniper school and like all these things. I was like, they do all that before they're even like assigned to a position. I knew nothing about it. I just saw all that stuff and I thought that's amazing. So yeah, I went through a process. I went to see basically every recruiter and had conversations with them and they were pretty entertaining. But I asked each one about its respective special operations and how do I get to that. And they were all kind of the same. It was like you have to pick a certain career field. And you can volunteer, and if you don't make it through initial training, like with the Navy, like if you don't make it through, then you go be whatever profession it is that you chose, blah, 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 blah. And I was fairly disappointed with all of those questions and answers. And then kind of at the 11th hour, the Army, an Army recruiter, not the one I had originally talked to, sort of came out and grabbed me and said, you know, hey, I heard you talking and can I show you a video and give you some info? And he knew a little more about the Army Rangers. And so, yeah, I was hooked on a Army Ranger contract, knowing that was my path to special operations because that's what I wanted to do.
Nice. How old were you when you joined?
17 when I originally signed up.
17?
Yeah, but 18 by the time I went off to the service. Graduated high school in 95 and then went to basic training at the end of that summer. I had a job down the beach. I was an ocean lifeguard, so I wanted to get like my full
nice
summer in. I wanted to enjoy that last
summer.
I bet
that was a rewarding experience.
You know what? Still to this day, and anybody that's ever been there or been through like ocean lifeguard training or like rookie weeks or, you know, they do their own version of a hell week. And that was some of the hardest shit I've ever done.
Really?
As an in shape, and I was a skinny, wiry little dude, so like I could run and things like that, but I was a skinny guy. But rookie week lifeguard training to earn a spot on the beach patrol was one of the hardest physical things I've ever done.
No shit.
Swimming and running. I mean, it's probably a lot of what you guys do in buds, and I don't have that, you know, experience. But a lot of the things that I did in special operations and courses that I went to and selections that I went through. Yeah, I think part of the digging into how do I get through this was honestly some of those memories about how bad that 1 week of my life sucked when I was a kid.
No shit. I wasn't expecting that at all.
Yeah.
I was referring to the women.
Yeah.
But
well, it's probably the best job to have at the beach. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was a good time. So I enjoyed that last summer I went in the service when I was 18, right after the end of that summer.
What were your parents thinking about? Were they behind it? They wanted you to go in the military?
I think it was a combination. You know, I think they both wanted me to go to college. I think my dad wanted to at least me to give a shot at playing ball at the next level because I had some talent. I think my mom was scared to death. looking back all these years later, I've never asked her about it, but I think, my mom was a little kid when my grandfather was going through some things post World War II, so he got back whatever year he got home, 44, 45, somewhere in there. And she was born in 1950. And so a lot of her early childhood, he struggled with addiction and some other things. And as she says, all these years later, the man that you got as a grandchild is a completely different man than I had when I was that age.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think she had some fears from that that made her a little worried about it. But
Interesting.
But for the most part, they were good with the decision. And yeah, that end of that summer, I shipped off to basic training.
Right on. Where did you go? Where was your first unit that you showed up to after basic?
Yeah, basic, Airborne school, and then the Ranger Indoctrination Program, or RIP. And so my first unit was 3rd Ranger Battalion.
Oh, no shit. You did get right in.
I did. There were some hiccups along the way that had nothing to do with me. But yeah, I ended up going to RIP. I ended up getting recycled in RIP because I missed a recall formation on a weekend in the middle of the course, like 2 weeks in. And instead of kicking us out, there were like 11 of us. They just recycled us all. So I did RIP twice, which was cool because I met a bunch of guys early on in my Ranger career that I still know to this day. I got 2 classes instead of 1 of guys that did that. You know what I mean? You know how it is.
Yep.
But yeah, I got through RIP, went to 3rd Ranger Battalion, and this was, 95, 96. So, at the time, you had B Company 375 is the company that was involved in Somalia in the Black Hawk Down incident in 93. So there was a lot of, and then you still had like Grenada Raiders and Panama guys that were still around the battalion. So even though it was peacetime war and we weren't involved in anything at the time, there was quite a bit of legacy and history in 3rd Ranger Battalion.
Yeah, I'll bet you showed up with a shit ton of experience on board. I haven't had any Rangers on yet. And I understand the difference, but I think a lot of the civilian population do not understand the difference. There's tabbed Rangers and there's schoolhouse Rangers, and it is confusing for a lot of people. Can you kind of clean that up a little bit?
Yeah, Ranger School is an Army school. For a lot of years, I don't know what they classify it as now, but for a lot of years, the people defined it as a leadership course, and I think it still is to this day. It's about leading small units in combat, preparation and understanding of operations orders, patrolling, basically small unit tactics in various environments. Ranger Regiment is a unit. So when you first go to the Ranger Regiment, you are not Ranger qualified. You haven't been to Ranger school, even though you were serving in the Ranger Regiment. Part of the pipeline for you as a young soldier in the Ranger Regiment is to attend Ranger school. So typically guys do it early on in their career when they're a young private or a specialist. They go to Ranger school, they earn their Ranger tab, then they come back and they're prepared, mentally, intellectually for that next leadership position, which is a team leader. So yeah, anyone can go to Ranger school. It's typically part of the pipeline, and infantry officers and combat arms officers in the Army, typically they go to Ranger school right away to gain that leadership and experience training and that hardship and overcoming that before they go out and lead troops. So,
okay.
So yeah, there is a difference. There's lots of guys in the service that have never been an Army Ranger that have a Ranger tab and are called Ranger qualified.
So I think I may have misspoke. Is it a regimental Ranger versus a tabbed Ranger, or is it a schoolhouse Ranger versus a tabbed Ranger?
There's how do I say it?
Yeah, how do you say it?
If you ever served in the Rangers, so in the Ranger Regiment, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd Ranger Battalion, or the regiment itself, you're an Army Ranger.
Okay.
If you went to school but never served in the Ranger Regiment, you are Ranger qualified.
Okay.
That's how most guys in the Army refer to it.
All right.
So, I had heartache with that for a lot of years. Because
I know a lot of guys did.
So I went to the regiment as a young private, and a year after being there, I had an alcohol-related incident. I had a DUI, and at the time, if you had an alcohol-related incident, you had to leave. So I left the regiment after about a year and change for having this alcohol-related incident. So even though I served there, I trained there, and I was a part of that organization, I left. Well, then I never ended up going to Ranger school. Like, it just never happened. The way path that my career took, I never did it. And so for years, people would be like, were you an Army Ranger? And I would be like hesitant to say yes. Because like I just described to you, well, yeah, I was, but my brain would go, kinda.
Yeah.
But were you? You know what I mean? Like I had, but the reality was, is, as time went by and I listened to more guys that had been there for a really long time, is, you know, whether you spent a week, a day, or 20 years in the regiment, if you served in the regiment, you can call yourself an Army Ranger. And so eventually I got over it. And that year, that short little time that I had in that organization, you know, I got more training and leadership development in that stretch of time than I would have gotten in several years in a conventional unit. So when something bad happened like that and I had to like pull my boots up and overcome it, I think the fact that I had done all of those things in that short period of time contributed to my success when I had to go out and overcome this obstacle of having just made a mistake. So when I ended up in the regular Army, I think it allowed me to more quickly adjust to having the personal confidence that if I keep at this and excel, I can get back on track where I need to be. But that took a few years.
What's the culture like at the Ranger Regiment? Especially,
then,
you said you got in at 94, 95?
95, 96, yeah.
And Smalley was 93?
Yeah, so it's 3 years later. Yeah, culture-wise, I mean, it was the hardest training place in the Army. Like, you were always doing something. So, you know, you got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, went and did PT every morning as a platoon or a squad, always pushing hard. You know, you had to be able to max your PT tests and all that. Like, yeah, it was some hard charging, hard training dudes, which wasn't necessarily the case in the rest of the conventional Army.
Okay, yeah.
So when you leave that, and having that been your only norm after basic training, airborne school, and all that, and then you go out to big service, and there, you know, there's dudes that are overweight, and there's guys that can barely pass their push-ups or whatever on the PT test. It's a pretty eye-opening experience because I had no idea, I had no frame of reference that the rest of the Army, even in combat arms, could frankly be like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was easy to excel in that environment, but it was a pretty big culture shock going from one extreme to the other.
When, I don't want to go into it yet, but when did you go from Ranger Regiment to conventional, or did you go somewhere else and then go to conventional?
No, I went to conventional. I went from 3rd Ranger Battalion to 3rd Infantry Division. So I went from being an airborne ranger serving in the regiment to a mechanized infantry battalion, where I was riding around in tracks and tanks. Because I was a 11 Charlie. So in the regiment, I was in weapons platoon. I was a mortar guy. And because I was an 11 Charlie, they had a few more options with me than they did like a standard rifleman 11 Bravo. So they sent me to what's called Kelly Hill, where 3rd Infantry Division was, still on Fort Benning. So all I did was move across post, which I think was also made it hard.
Yeah.
Because I just left over there.
Damn. Yeah, that would
now I'm over
tough.
here. But, you know, most guys went what's called worldwide assignment, where and you go away to some other installation or somewhere. But because I was a mortar guy, they sent me to 3rd ID.
Okay. I've worked with a lot of other soft units, being a SEAL, and then some of my time at the agency. For some reason, I never, ever got to work with the Rangers.
Wow.
So I'm interested in the culture because I don't know about it. When you get in there, you know, in a lot of soft units, the entire team's involved in mission planning and putting together target packages and all that kind of stuff, and everybody has their specific duties, and everybody is, I guess what I'm trying to say is all ideas are welcome to the table.
Sure.
You might get called a fool if you got a dumbass fucking idea, but
Yeah.
but there's always a way to get your idea in there, and it's encouraged. Is it like that in the Ranger Regiment?
It wasn't when I was there. So Ranger Regiment back then was, you know, they were the best trained airborne infantrymen on the planet. So they shot more, they jumped more, they fast roped, they did some things that conventional forces didn't do, but they were still run like an infantry rifle platoon. You know? So you had 4 squads, you had two team leaders in each, or team leaders and squad leaders, platoon sergeant, platoon leader, first sergeant, company commander, like they were led like a standard rifle company when it
Very
came.
rank structured.
Very rank structured, absolutely. Yeah, you had to earn your keep at the lower levels before you were, moved up the ranks and were a non-commissioned officer and in charge of people. But yeah, it was very much led like traditional, any rifle platoon anywhere in the Army.
Okay.
Yeah, nowadays, and they do a lot more than they ever used to. I would imagine it's still run relatively the same though, because regardless of the amount of training that you've received, you're still an 18-year-old kid. You're still a 19-year-old kid, and lack the combat and personal experience to make appropriate decisions. So I imagine they still run it mostly the same, even though they do a lot more things. Like CQB wasn't really a part of a lot of what regiment did when I first got there. Now those guys are they're an extension of JSOC and hit targets on their own. And yeah, they're fully capable of doing all those things.
Yeah, it seems like, everybody's done a lot of growing after 20 years of war. From the outside looking in to all these different units and interviewing guys, to me, it appears that the Ranger Regiment is the one that has probably grown the most professionally. And I guess coming from where they were pre 9/11 to where they are now, seems to me they've done the most changing as a whole unit. But would you agree with that?
Yeah, everybody's evolved. I think what the Global War on Terror, what GWAT did was it got a lot of people doing basically direct action missions where that necessarily wasn't their previous profile. You know, as an example, you had, ODAs, you had Green Berets out there whose specialty is unconventional warfare and buy through and with stuff, using and training indigenous forces to achieve an objective, amongst a bunch of other things. But, they were doing DA, they were doing raids and assaults, and yeah, sure, maybe with some indige at some point, but they were also doing them unilaterally. Like that happened because of GWAT and so many missions and op tempo and all that stuff. And I think it happened across the SOF community.
Yeah.
And I think that happened to the regiment as well. I think they got pulled in and utilized in a lot more circumstances that they necessarily weren't built for. They were built for airfield seizures. They were built for jumping into, like Just Cause in Panama or 83 in Grenada. They were built to jump in, seize an airfield, eliminate the threat on that airfield, and establish an airhead to bring on follow-on forces to do other things. Or quick reaction stuff or whatever. What they morphed into was an independent assault force that had a capability equivalent to most special operations units. So I personally don't think it was the correct thing, but I think it's just what happened because we were so busy.
Yeah.
So they definitely grew and expanded, in my opinion. When later on in my career, I watched how we utilized the Ranger Regiment go from utilizing them in support of us to utilizing them as another action arm so that we could do more things at a time.
Oh.
And there's pros and cons to that. You expand your workforce and your ability to hit more targets at a time and do more on the battlefield. But I think you lose a little something. I think there's some things that are brought to the table with seasoned special operators that you don't necessarily get with an 18 or 19-year-old kid. It's probably, and I don't know because I don't have the experience, but it's probably similar in the SEAL community. You have the SEAL community, which is guys from 18 or 19 to the end of their career, but then you have SEAL Team 6, which is, more seasoned SEALs that have been there, done that, and learned from those experiences. And I'm sure there's some huge differences between the two.
Absolutely. What kind of stuff were you doing after you got through the training pipeline at the regiment?
They had a cycle. So, you'd have stretches, and this is my recollection, but, we'd have cycles where we were doing a lot of shooting and a lot of range time. And then we would do what they called fixed wing and rotary wing bilats. So fixed wing was like you do a lot of jumping and airfield seizures for a stretch and different planes and whatever. And then you do rotary wing bilats where you do a lot of, infills with helos and fast rope training and all that. You sort of had a cyclical thing. And then you had your ready force cycle where you were the on-call battalion in the event that, somebody hits 911 for the United States Army, you had to be ready to go anywhere in, I don't know what it is, like 18 hours or less or something. But so it was a typical training cycle of preparation and training, range time, the various bilats, mount training where you're doing urban stuff, patrolling training, MTTs, so little courses like, basic demolition or whatever those other skills were. And then you had your like pre-deployment phase later on if you were deploying. Back then it was just your prep for if something happened phase. And then you had your down phase where you weren't on alert cycle, and they would do block leave and things like that. But yeah, I think the biggest difference for me between the regiment and when I went out to the regular Army was in the regular Army, there'd be whole days where you did nothing. Like dudes would just be sitting in their barracks rooms, like doing correspondence courses or hiding out basically. And it was kind of accepted. Looking back years later, I know that like budgets and things have a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
Like conventional units just don't get millions and millions of dollars to buy ammunition and rounds to be out on the range and training. Whereas, people that fall into the special operations bubble did. So it subsequently increases proficiency and all those things. But yeah, there were a lot of time where you're just doing nothing. And that was a shock.
What did you deploy with the regiment?
No, not to combat.
Okay.
Because it was peacetime. I did a deployment per se with them. We went to Germany. We jumped in and did a 40-mile movement to an objective. And
a 40-mile movement?
A 40-mile movement through Germany. And I want to say...
On foot?
I want to say Stanley McChrystal, General McChrystal was in the regiment. He might have been 3rd Ranger Battalion commander at the time. And I think Colonel Leszczynski maybe was the 75th. But regardless, they wanted to prove that the regiment had the capability to jump in behind enemy lines and move an excessive distance like that and then still have effects on target. So we did. We did a 40-mile infill over a couple of days. And I was a mortar guy, so I had like a base plate and, I had a 120-pound rucksack and skinny little 135-pound kit or whatever I was back then. But it was awesome. Like, it sucked, but it was neat to do something like that and go, we just walked 40 miles and then hit a target.
How long did that take?
I think it took us like 2.5 days. Yeah, maybe 3. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But that was really neat. And then we did some stuff with the Germans. We did some cross training, got our German shoots a sneer, marksmanship badge, did a foreign wing jump and some other things. And so that was literally like my first year in the Army. So like I thought all that was just normal. Like that was going on all over the place. And it definitely was not.
So how did you wind up in the conventional Army?
I got a DUI.
That was it?
That was it. Yeah, I got a DUI, and they sent me to 3rd Infantry Division. And yeah, so next thing you know, I'm a mechanized infantryman instead of jumping out of planes and riding around in a tank.
Holy shit. How did that feel when you got the word, hey, you're done here, it's over?
Pretty awful. When it happened, my section started, my mortar section started at the time. So the E6 that was in charge of the mortar section, he got a DUI the same night. And so they kind of were making an example out of us, but it didn't happen right away. Like that stuff happened and we were, I guess, punished for lack of a better term. We both got a general letter of reprimand that stays with you for your whole career, which was terrifying to me as a young private. But we didn't leave. We actually did the Germany thing after we got in trouble because they wanted like a full workforce. They wanted all the bodies to go do this exercise in Germany and spend this time over there. So I actually had good things happen in the regiment to where there was a point where I was like, maybe I'm not leaving. Maybe they just forgot about it. But no, the time came and I got orders when we got home from Germany and I left.
Damn.
But yeah, Third ID was a different experience. I had some really good leaders there, some funny leaders, and then some real pieces of shit that were in the organization. And I think what that taught me was in every organization in the military, and it's probably true in the Navy too, there's turds in every punch bowl. It's just depending on what level you're at, there's less. Like, there's good and bad in every organization. It's just, it's the percentages. And so I had some great folks, some great leadership, some people that changed my career. And a battalion commander in 3rd Infantry Division that was probably the difference between me getting out of the Army after 4 years, feeling defeated, like I got in trouble and I wouldn't be able to overcome it, to me re-enlisting and staying in the Army and continuing what ended up being a 20-year career.
Damn. What kind of stuff were you doing at Third ID other than sitting in the barracks?
Again, so there's going to be a recurring theme here.
All right.
Like, I think throughout the course of my life, with all the good and all the bad that's happened to me, I've just had good timing. Like, I've been certain places at certain times where I was just fortunate to get to experience whatever it was. And so Third ID, at first I was like, this is awful. Like, I'm down at the motor pool changing oil and breaking track on a tank on Mondays. Like, that's my Monday, every Monday. But what ended up happening was, so post First Gulf War, remember we did we controlled all the airspace over Iraq, and we patrolled the airspace. Well, somewhere in that phase was called Operation Desert Thunder, which is Saddam was being goofy again. So we shut down the airspace again, and then we launched all of these like exercises in the desert of Kuwait to sort of a show of force and remind him, like, we'll come beat you down again if you act a fool. So we ended up deploying, like, an entire mechanized brigade ended up deploying. I think they called it like Operation Intrinsic Action on our side, but it was the overarching thing was called Operation Desert Thunder. We got an expeditionary medal for that. Even though it was like peacetime and we weren't at war with anybody, we forward deployed to Kuwait, right on the border of Iraq. But what it turned into was 6 months of living in the desert, building, I think they called them Kabuls or something, but it was basically a dirt bermed giant compound. We erected all the tents, we filled all the sandbags, basically cradle to grave, from nothing but flat desert to an entire FOB, for lack of a better term, forward operating base, and then conducted maneuvers out of there. And what we had was, so all of the war stock from the first Gulf War was still in Kuwait. So we had ammunition and artillery rounds and mortar rounds for days. So for this 6 month period, we did live fire stuff like literally like 4 and 5 times a week. I shot more rounds in that 6 months than probably most guys that spent an entire career in an infantry mortar unit ever shot. And it was because it was this big demonstration of force. So we got really good at what we did. So even with the studs and the duds in the platoon that I was in, we turned into a really effective, cohesive unit because we had nothing to do but train. We were sitting in the desert forward deployed like we were prepping to go to war tomorrow.
Damn.
And it turned out, for me, like leadership-wise, it turned out to be a great experience, understanding what being deployed felt like and being away from your family and, as a young guy, filling sandbags and burning shit, all the uncomfortable stuff that goes with it. That did suck at the time, but when you look back on years later, you're like, man, I'm lucky that happened. Like, very few people get an opportunity like that.
Yeah.
So it turned out to be really good. And then came back from that. I'm sorry.
Did a lot of the guys look up to you because you came from the regiment?
Yeah, I think that made it easier. I think the leadership, the NCOs, saw early that I had been exposed to good leaders and that I was hungry and motivated more so than a lot of the guys that they were used to. So they sort of took to me. The younger guys did have more respect for you because, as far as they were concerned, you were an Army Ranger. It didn't matter that you left. You had done that and they hadn't. So they definitely looked up to you. But I sort of aggressively pursued leadership roles when I was there. Once I figured out I could, like that I could be the PT stud and push other guys to excel in physical fitness, and that I could lead and make guys go train and do the right thing. Like, I saw that leadership like that. I saw that younger guys responded to it, and I saw an opportunity to get myself back on track, and I pursued it.
That's awesome. I wasn't expecting you to say that the leadership liked you, because a lot of guys that come from a unit like that go to conventional side, and then there's some insecurities that come out in the leadership because you came from a soft unit.
Well, funny story. I've told this one other time. So when I first got there, my platoon sergeant, and if he ever hears one of these things, I hope to God the man finds me on social media and reaches out to me, because I love him to death to this day, and I think really highly of him. But he was a master sergeant, so in a mortar platoon, it was real rank heavy. You had a E8 platoon sergeant, which was rare, You had 2 E7 section sergeants and then a bunch of E6s and E5s, et cetera, et cetera. And he was our platoon sergeant. And so I show up day one, sign into the unit in processing or whatever, and I finally get to my platoon. And he brings me into his like platoon office, and he's sitting at the desk, and he's this giant man, Master Sergeant Donald P. Blackman. Huge, like NFL lineman size dude. You know, on the overweight side, NFL lineman size dude. Right? And I say that lovingly. But he's like, have a seat, and he's talking to me. And he said some cool things in the beginning. He's like, hey, you know, I want you to I don't want you to beat yourself up. Like, you're a 19-year-old kid. You made a mistake. You got spanked for it. Learn your lesson, grow from it, and move on. He's like, I'm not going to carry that into this. I'm not going to hold it over your head. No one's going to look down on you, and I'm not going to let them look down on you. Like, he said some really positive things. And then he paused, and he said, I want to ask you a few questions. I said, okay. And he said, Ranger Battalion. I was never in the Ranger Battalion. He's like, but, you know, I've seen them, and, you know what they've done in the past and learned a little about them. And I said, yes, Sergeant. And he said, there's not a lot of black fellas in the Ranger Regiment. And he was a black guy. And I said, no, Sergeant, there's not. And I'm scared, right? Like before we even started, even though he had said all these positive things, like he buttered me up to ask me something difficult. So I'm a little nervous. And he said, not a lot of black fellas in the regiment, huh? And I said, no, Sergeant, there's not. He said, how many black guys do you think are in the Ranger Regiment? How many black guys are in 3rd Ranger Battalion? I said, 4. Just like that. And he like jumped in his seat and he went, you know there's only 4? And I go, well, I mean, when you're in the dining facility, Sergeant, it's not that hard. Like, there's just not that many guys. I said, I think there's like 4. And he goes, huh. And he leans forward in his chair and he leans over the desk to close the distance and he says, why do you think that is? And I thought, in probably a split second, my brain went, shit. If I say whatever, he's gonna know that I'm lying to him, and I've now set the conditions for our relationship for the rest of my time here. If I tell him what I really think, he might punch me in the face, or he might respect what I have to say. And so I rolled the dice, and I said, I'm just gonna tell him the truth, or at least what I really think to be the truth. Remember, I was an ocean lifeguard. And I said, honestly, Sergeant, I think it's because black guys have trouble passing the swim test. And he paused, and then he busted out laughing. And he said, you're goddamn right. I can't swim a lick.
Holy shit.
And we had a laugh. And you know, and he said, right then and there, he said, you're all right, VanSant. He's like, I like you, and I think you're going to do just fine. And so fast forward a while later in the platoon, and we, you know, one night in Kuwait, like we had a long conversation about it. He's like, yeah, man. He's like, they come from different places. He's like, but a lot of black guys that end up in the service, they grew up in the inner city or they grew up someplace where they didn't have pools, they didn't have access, they didn't swim.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You can call it a stereotype. You know, nowadays it's like people will come after you if you said something like that. There was nothing racist or anything in any of that. It was matter of fact, and it was true to the regiment and in a lot of units. And I think they came up with ways to combat that. Like, yeah, you know what? We do have some people that grow up and don't swim, so let's afford them an opportunity to learn and to practice so they can be successful in some of those courses, and they're not limited by their background or experience prior service. So yeah, it was a funny moment that led to a much deeper relationship and a more honest relationship between the two of us. And he was a really good leader. Like, he was a smart guy. He pushed us when we were in the desert. He genuinely cared about the Army, and he cared about me, and I knew that. And same with, you know, my battalion commander that basically talked me into staying in the service. You know, those guys took a personal interest in me as a human being, and it stuck with me forever. Like, as a leader, you know, and then even now, like, you can have an impact on a single individual's life, sometimes just with the words that you use.
Yeah.
And showing them that you care, or taking the time to listen to their story or to share yours, can make a difference in their life for, you know, fucking 10, 20 years to come. And those are just a couple examples of people that had an impact on me that early after a mistake that changed the course of what I did.
That's awesome. How long did you wind up spending at the 3rd ID?
About 2.5 years, probably. I was coming up on, you know, you can re-enlist a year out, 12 months out from when your time to get out of the service date was. And like I said, I had that conversation with the battalion commander at the time. I was really stressed about my letter of reprimand, my punishment hurting me and like slowing me down. And he was just very reassuring. Colonel Lee was his name. That's another one that I wish would track me down if he ever heard something that I said on social media, because I'd love to hear how he's doing and tell him, like, sir, you changed my life. But he convinced me to re-enlist. We had a joke, and I said, I don't really want to stay here, sir. As much as good a time as I had, like, I wanted to get back to jumping out of planes and being a paratrooper at least, and start working my way back towards special operations. And the best place I thought to do that was Fort Bragg. So he agreed, and he helped me out, and I ended up re-enlisting to go to the 82nd at Fort Bragg. And I thought, all right, I'm one step back closer. I'm gonna go back to jumping out of planes, being an infantryman in an airborne unit, and I'm at Bragg, which is like kind of the hub and the best place to be if you're going to continue to go down that path.
Yeah. So you were like a no bullshit, very direct, to the point, no matter what the consequences are, from a very young age. Because those are two tough questions that you got, and you answered them honestly. That takes a lot of people a number of years to get to that point.
Probably to a fault. Yeah, I mean, I was a humor guy too. Like, I think I've always tried to find funny in the situation. So in periods of high stress, I tend to resort to something humorous. Like, I didn't say that, but there was a bit of my response to Master Sergeant Blackman that I hoped he would laugh.
Yeah.
You know, like, I rolled the dice.
Yeah.
But, and that was true. That was true to the time, and probably, you know, still some issues today. They've just changed a lot of things and made it better for people. But yeah, I think I was trying to get him to laugh a little bit too. So yeah, speak your mind, hope for the best.
Yeah. Doesn't always work out like that.
Doesn't.
But we're very similar in that aspect. But so you moved over to the 82nd Airborne.
Yeah, I moved over to the 82nd. Again, I was a mortar guy. I immediately took a mortar section in a line company. I was in Alpha Company 2nd 325. The White Falcons. Our sister battalion was the Blue Falcons. I was just glad I wasn't one of them. Who does that?
Yeah. Real quick, was there no option to go back to the regiment?
I didn't know. That was not a question I ever asked. Somebody asked me that like last year, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I could have gone back or not. In my mind, because when you go through the Ranger Indoctrination Program and all that stuff, you get RFS, whatever that stands. I don't even remember. But if you get booted, my opinion was that you could never come back. So I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if you could or you couldn't, but it never crossed my mind. It was like, I got to do this. It was great. I fucked it up. Now I'm on the path back. So what's the next step for me? So in the 82nd, I enjoyed what I was doing. I enjoyed being back and jumping out of planes, but I needed to figure out how to get back on the path to be a special operator. Yeah, so Alpha Company 2nd 325, the White Falcons. I was a mortar section sergeant, so I had my own guys. I had my own mortar team, 2 teams. I ran their training. I did their counseling. I was leading troops. And I was also fortunate in that as the mortar section sergeant, like, I didn't have a platoon or a platoon sergeant. So I was basically a platoon leader and a platoon sergeant at the same time. So I had 3 rifle platoons and the mortar section. So I would be in meetings, the platoon sergeant, the NCO, non-commissioned officer related meetings, but then I would also have to go to the officer meetings with the company commander, the first sergeant, and all the lieutenants that ran the platoons. So it was a really good experience for me seeing, non-commissioned officer leadership versus officer leadership. And I kind of ended up at a point where I was getting to know and sort of chaperoning a lot of the new lieutenants that would come in. Their platoon sergeant was an E7. He was this big, intimidating guy that they were scared to ask questions to. I was an E5 promotable, low-level, non-commissioned officer. And because I was approachable and joked and laughed and stuff, I think it made it easier for them to, like, talk to me and ask me questions. So I ended up sort of in a role where I had a good relationship with new lieutenants that would come in and kind of help them along the way. That turned into meeting a young lieutenant named Paul Caron. Paul and I became friends very quickly. He was a West Pointer. Just a good dude, just wanted to be a good leader, like wanted to train guys, wanted to make soldiers better at what they did so that they could win the fight and survive on the battlefield. And I think I saw that right away. Very much a Boy Scout, a little dorky, but like not in a bad way, more like in an Eagle Scout kind of way.
Yeah.
And I kind of appreciated it. Didn't know anything about his family, but ended up finding out later on that his dad was the Delta Force Sergeant Major, was Doug Karen. And so Paul, before I knew that, had a lot of conversations with me about going SF versus other things. He asked me why I wanted to do it. And I said, at this point, I knew enough in the service, and now I'm back at Bragg. I knew I wanted to end up, if I was capable, as a Delta operator. But I assumed that I had to go be a Green Beret or a Army Ranger, which I had already messed that up. I had to go be a Green Beret to get there. And he said, why would you do that? And I said, what do you mean? I said, it's a stepping stone. Like, I'm a young dude. I can't just go straight to being a Delta operator. They're not going to take me. I have no combat experience. I'm young, blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, yeah, that's not how it works. Like, you can submit to be asked to attend selection for that side of the house, and you don't have to be a Green Beret. He's like, the minimum requirements are this. They do a briefing at this time. And I didn't even put together how this guy knew all this. Like, this is before I knew his old man was the unit sergeant major. He'd basically grown up as a kid with his dad in that organization.
No shit. So he's withholding all this.
Yeah, I don't think he was withholding. I think at a certain point, I think he thought he had told me or I knew.
Okay.
But he always used to say his dad was a combat engineer. His dad was a 12 Bravo. And when I would ask him, he would say, yeah, he's a sergeant major. Like, that's all he would say. He never said he's the Delta Force sergeant major, right?
Yeah.
So one day we were coming back from training. Me and Paul, we were setting up some training for the platoon. I had moved. There's a point in there where he left the line company and he went to the reconnaissance platoon, to the scout platoon. And he asked me to come with him when he did it. And I was like, I'm an 11 Charlie. Like, I'm not a 11 Bravo regular infantryman, and those are regular infantryman billets. Matter of fact, they're Ranger qualified infantryman billets. And he was like, why don't you come with me? And I was like, how do I do that? And he was like, it's easy. You do a 4187. Like I say, he's a brilliant guy. Do a 4187 to the commander requesting an MOS change from 11 Charlie to 11 Bravo. And he goes, the commander signs off on it. We go to retention. They do some paperwork. They'll cut you orders for the MOS change, and then we'll move you over to the scout platoon and you can take a team. And I was like, but I'm a mortar guy. And he was like, Chris, you know more about small unit tactics and you do a better job like leading your squad than 99% of the rifle squad leaders that we have in this company. He's like, I'd love to have you over there. And so I did it. I reclassed. I was a E5 promotable because the points were maxed out back then. When I reclassed to 11 Bravo, the points were way down here because there's a lot of them. So I immediately promoted to E6 too. So now I'm a staff sergeant in the scout platoon, and yeah, doing that with him as my boss, the platoon sergeant, and then him as the lieutenant. But yeah, so we were out doing some training, setting up some training, and again, Paul and I got to be pretty good friends. And we were coming back, and he said, can we stop off and see my dad? And I was like, yeah. Again, I thought his dad was a combat engineer because he was a 12 Bravo, because that was his MOS. And so we stopped at the unit compound, and I was like, what are you doing, dude? And he's like, I'm going to see my old man.
Be here.
And I'm like, what are you talking about? So at this point, I had a selection date. Like I had.
You already had a selection
I
date.
had submitted my packet. They had accepted it and asked me to attend selection. And because Paul had talked me out of going the Green Beret route and convinced me to give it a shot. If it didn't work out, he's like, then you can go do that. Nothing against the differences. Mm-hmm. It made sense to me. Like, shoot for the stars. And so we went in the compound. I ended up meeting the unit sergeant major and scared to death out of my mind. And Doug didn't say anything. I think he said, like, Paul. I think he said, Chris, Paul tells me you have a selection date. And yes, Roger that, Sergeant Major. Yes, I do. and all he went was, good luck. Not like encouraging. Just good luck. Like, good luck, kid. You're not going to make it through this. But yeah, and then we got out of there and I ended up going to selection twice. But yeah, I went from that 82nd reconnaissance platoon to selection. I failed the first time. I got pulled the day before the last day, fair to meet the time standard, as they say. And but they asked me to come back. And I wanted to do it in the same season, so I waited a full year. I went back the next year, and then was successful that second time.
Why did you want to do it in the same season?
The weather was pretty interesting when I was there, and I wanted the conditions to be as close to the same as they could. So the fall leaves and snow occasionally and whatever, I wanted it to be exactly the same. And I was afraid the terrain would look a lot different in the winter. And you cover so much ground. I wanted every aspect in my favor. Like I have to be even faster than I was, and I felt like I crushed it the first time. Like I trained my butt off. Like I really felt like I moved faster the first time I did it than the second.
Really?
But the second time, I think I just made smarter choices. So consequently, the overall made me faster and better. But
do you think they send guys? Do you think they, however you want to call it, reject guys on purpose to see if they'll come back, to see how bad they want it?
I do.
You
personally,
do?
Yeah. I mean, in the unit, there's only a couple of positions where you are privy to the information of the how, what, when, where, and why as it is to selection. And if you don't fill one of those billets at any point in your career in the organization, you'll never know what those are. So there's, 95% of the guys that have ever been an operator there don't know what the criteria is, don't know what the time standards are, don't know what any of that info is. So I personally think yes. Like I felt like, right, wrong, or indifferent, I felt like they went, this is a 23-year-old kid, like never been to war, whatever his background was. He had a DUI as a young private. Let's just test him and see if he'll do it all again. And so I did. And luckily, thankfully, it worked out.
Did it crush you the first time when you didn't make it in?
I don't think it crushed me. I mean, I was exhausted. I mean, I knew I gave it everything that I had. I think there was a little bit of comfort in that you're just not good enough. So when I did my exit interview and they said, basically, they read you the party line, you fail to meet the time standard, but then they sort of built me back up and they said, hey, you did a really good job for like a young, inexperienced guy. Like you did a really good job. And we would really like you to come back and try again because we think you potentially could have a future here. And that was enough. So even though you failed, it was like they pushed you out the door with momentum.
That's good.
To kind of come back. And I think that was really important.
Were you ever on that board?
I was not, no. And the guy that actually did my, if I remember correctly, the guy that did my exit interview was Tom Greer, who passed away a number of years ago. Tom was a officer in the unit and got out and wrote a couple books under the pen name Dalton Fury, if you remember any of those. He died of cancer a few years ago. But yeah, I remember the words. Yeah, you did a good job, and we think you could make it, but we want to see you come back and do it again.
Damn. So following your career, you showed up to the regiment in 95? 96. Spent a year there.
Yep.
Went to 3rd ID.
Yep.
Then went to 82nd. We've got to be getting close to 2001.
Yeah, real close. So the first year I went to selection was 2000 and failed. That was fall of 2000. And then, so 2001 happens, fast forward that summer in August. So I knew I had a return selection date, and selection is at the end of September into October. They run it twice a year, fall and spring.
Holy shit.
So it's August. Two things happen. In August of 2001, I sprained my ankle playing basketball a month and a half out from selection. And I was like, you got to be kidding. I mean, bad, like high ankle sprain, where you would have been better off if you broke it kind of thing. So that was obstacle one. Obstacle two was I got orders from the Army sending me to the drill instructor course to be a drill sergeant down at Fort Benning.
Oh, shit.
So I was on the ankle thing happened, and then that happened, and I was like, I am not the guy. Like you said, I've always been pretty open and honest and shit. I'm not the guy that you want out there shaping young minds.
Yeah.
I'm just not. I'm sure I would have been fine and taken it on had it happened. But yeah, I was on orders to be a drill instructor. So I was rehabbing the ankle as best I could. I was taping the crap out of it. You used to get your ankles taped in football and stuff. And I called the recruiter and I said, hey, look, man, I just got orders to be a drill sergeant. Like, I heard these are like if you get the old rumor was if you got orders to be a recruiter or a drill sergeant, there was no way you were getting out of it. Like, that was your path. And for the next 3 years, that's what you were going to do. And so I'm terrified. And I called the unit recruiter and he was like, yeah, no big deal. Don't worry about it. And I was like, what? And I go, but I'm supposed to report like before I go to selection. And he was like, yeah, don't worry about it. And I'm like, so you just want me to not report? And he was like, yeah, whatever. And I'm like, all right, well, this guy told me I don't have to do anything, to just ignore it. And so whatever happened behind the scenes, that time came and went. 9/11 happened. And I was out in the field training with the recon platoon with the scouts. And then not 2 weeks after 9/11, I left and went to West Virginia for selection.
Damn. Do you think that event gave you extra motivation that maybe helped you get through selection the second time?
I think it did everybody. Yeah, I think the realization was, if I get through this and then get through the operator training course, like, I'm going to war for my country. Like, absolutely no doubt. Like, and I think the wanting to be like that force that you knew was going to take the fight to the people that were responsible for this, I think that was huge. So it wasn't discussed. Like, no, I don't think we ever talked about it. And most guys there didn't talk a lot. Like, it was a very serious and somber, like, selection class. You're scared to talk to each other anyway. But there were a handful of guys just like me that had done it the year prior, so they were faces that I knew. And some of them, interesting ones, you know, like I went to selection with Alan Shoemate, who was Walt Shoemate's son, who was one of the early on founders and sergeant majors of the Delta Force. And he was a repeat with me. So, like, a few of us knew each other, but even then, I don't think we talked about 9/11 at all. It was about, you know, the great breakfast that we just had, or how bad we thought today was going to suck.
Was the pulse or the tone of selection from the cadre side any different?
Not a bit. It's
exactly the same?
That's the most professionally run course I have ever attended.
No shit.
Yeah, in the beginning, from the classes that they give you to make sure everyone has been provided with the same amount of information and you're all at the same level, so nobody has an excuse as to why they were or weren't successful from an education standpoint. It's the most professionally run course I've ever been a part of. And they maintain that to this day. I guarantee it.
I know it's apples and oranges, but would you say it's more professional than OTC itself?
Different. The intent at selection is to maintain separation between the students and the cadre.
Okay.
OTC is phased. It's a phased approach. So in the beginning, it's very much like that. But then as you progress, eventually you get to a point where it's, hey, you can call me Bob or Joe or whatever.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
I do.
OTC is more about integrating you into unit mindset and the way the unit really functions. So by the time you get to the end, it's a little more like what it's going to feel like in squadron than when you first started.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
It does. Well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about OTC and what that training pipeline looked like.
Cool.
I want to give a big thank you out right now to all the Vigilance Elite patrons out there that are watching the show right now. Just want to say thank you, guys. You are our top supporters, and you're what makes this show actually happen. If you're not on Vigilance Elite Patreon, I want to tell you a little bit about what's going on in there. So, we do a little bit of everything. There's plenty of behind-the-scenes content from the actual Shawn Ryan show. On top of that, basically what I do is I take a lot of the questions that I get from you guys, or the patrons, and then I turn them into videos. So we get... Right now, there's a lot of concern about self-defense, home defense, crimes on the rise all throughout the country, actually all throughout the world. And so we talk about everything from how to prep your home, how to clear your home, how to get familiar with a firearm, both rifle and pistol, for beginners and advanced. We talk about mindset. We talk about defensive driving. We have an end of the month live chat that I'm on at the end of every month where we can talk about whatever topics you guys have. It's actually done on Zoom. You might enjoy it. Check it out. And if Zoom's not your thing, or you don't like live chats, like I said, there's a library of well over 100 videos on where to start with prepping, all the firearm stuff, pretty much anything you can think of, it's on there. So anyways, go to www.patreon.com/vigilanceelite, or just go in the link in the description. It'll take you right there. And if you don't want to, and you just want to continue to watch the show, that's fine too. I appreciate it either way. Love you all. Let's get back to the show. Thank you.
I see this guy up there, and he's laying there sleeping. He's just starting to wake up. Dude's getting up and he's swinging up, and I'm going, don't. And I'm just looking at him, going, don't do it. Why was I doing that? No rules of engagement. I could have taken him right when I walked out on there, because he was up there in security and had a gun next to him. Done. But I didn't. I was going towards him. I was still walking towards him, closing the distance. And then the guy just like right there goes, and he drops it because he saw it. So it's alien versus caveman. We are sexual beings. And so a problem that a lot of religions do is they crush sexuality down to a point when they cause problems. And I think that's part of what happened to me. I was within a religious institution where sexuality was forbidden. It was like, you don't even say the word. I'm gonna start living a bit right now and trying to figure out who I am. And part of the figure out who I am was part of that isolation. Always wanted to be my sister as a kid, just like I said.
The Iron Man suit.
I did a lot of really good projects. I went in a lot of rabbit holes, you know. And then for whatever reason, I don't know how it happened, but I talked about the Iron Man project.
Chris, you could call a lot of people idiots after what I've just heard you talk about.
And so that's when I started going into the ancient times. Like, you're not going to tell me the sky is blue. I want to know why it's blue. To give these puberty blockers out is a prison data from all those pedos.
That's what they're using?
Yeah.
Can I ask if you're attracted to women?
I'm not.
You're not?
No.
And you fell in love with Kristen?
Mm-hmm.
All right, Chris, we're back from the break. You just wrapped up selection. You got in. You're going to go to OTC. What did they tell you when you made it in selection?
Well, you finish the stress phase, the physical portion of selection, and then you have the board. The board process is what it is. I'm not going to get into it because I think that mental aspect is part of the process. Mm-hmm. But when I finished, a guy that I looked up to for years after this happened and got to know a little bit better, but he said after they told me they were I think their words were, "We're going to take a chance on you." Take a flyer here and
We're going to roll the dice
and see how it works out. But congratulations, you've been accepted and you're going to attend the operator training course. And I don't think I reacted. Like, I think I was just stone-faced. There were some funny moments in the board and the questions that they asked, and I put my foot in my mouth a couple of times as a young guy, as you would expect. And the guy that sort of walked me out afterwards, he sort of like put his arm around me and he said, "It's cool, you can smile now." And it was a cool moment. Like, and I think I didn't even realize how like in shock I was. And then that lasted for a brief few seconds, and then I realized I still had a long road ahead of me, and that was the operator training course.
Yeah. Any of the guys that you knew from before, did they make it with you? Or were you the only one?
Good question. Yes. One of them did. Yeah, a guy went through the course with me. That guy, he's kind of he's a picture of resiliency. But a number of years later in the unit, he ended up getting blown up by an IED, and lost half of his face really, and went through a number of years of reconstructive surgery. But yeah, he's involved in a lot of veteran issues to this day, and held in there and kept doing his thing. But yeah, so one of the guys, yes.
Amazing. Well, let's move into OTC then.
Sure.
Well, actually, did you go back to your unit first, or are you there now?
I did, but it's really quick.
Okay.
Like, you go back and basically out process, and then you move over to the compound. When you're a fall selection and assessment graduate, I guess, for lack of a better term, there's a lot of admin things and some classes that happen early on, and then some basic rifle marksmanship stuff that happens, and then you get a little bit of a break for Christmas, and then you come back hot and heavy. But yeah, it's really quick. I think I had less than 2 weeks back at the unit. I think 11 days later, I reported to the compound.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. Like, it was 9/11 and it happened, and I think we were chomping at the bit. Like, let's go, let's get this on, which I think was a good thing. I think it focused us a little more. You know, I was terrified, and excited, and everything we did, it didn't matter what it was. I was like, yes, because I was this like young, hungry kid, so grateful to be where I was, that I think I was just sort of in awe every day and took it all in like a sponge.
That's awesome. I mean, you'd really, the timing, the way you positioned yourself right after, or, you know, leading up to and right after 9/11, I mean, the timing is, for what you wanted to do, I mean, you really, you couldn't have timed that better.
Yeah, that's some universe shit, like we were saying.
Yeah.
Like, and like I said, the theme continues. Like, my timing with things sort of continues throughout my career, both good and bad, but they all led to where I am today. So
Yeah.
I'm grateful for all of it.
Well, let's move into training. Let's day one. What is day one?
Oh, man. I'll preface this with, I have giant holes in my memory from various injuries and things, so I'll do my best. But yeah, early on, it was like I said, it was some classes. And then I think the thing that I was most impressed or taken aback by was how they really started from zero. So you had guys that had been Green Berets for a bunch of years. You had guys that had been Army Rangers for a bunch of years. I think there were 3 guys in my operator training course class that were, for lack of a better term, from the conventional Army. One of them turned out to be one of my really good friends, Mike McNulty, another guy that didn't make it through the course. But they really went back to the basics. You know, literal basic rifle marksmanship is where we started out. So on a known distance range, laying on the ground, you know, rotating between, you're a guy on the line taking slow aim fire shots and working on the fundamentals of marksmanship, to the guy down in the tunnel, you know, lifting the target, putting the pasties on it, lowering the target. They really went back to square one and started with the basics and went through a block of instruction like you had never shot a firearm before. And it was professional, it was organized, and I felt like I was actually being taught. You know, like basic training, you kind of go through, there's a little bit of hurriedness to it, where they're just trying to check some blocks and get you to a bare minimum level. This was actual focused instruction, where I felt like the instructors were over your shoulders, they were asking questions, and they were constantly feeding you information and experience that was, you know, the intent was to train you professionally to be an operator.
Is it encouraging? Do they encourage you in that environment, or is it a beat down? Do they use humiliation?
No, it's definitely not a beatdown. There is not in selection or in the operator training course is there an element of hazing or intimidation or any of that stuff.
No shit, nothing.
Nothing. I think the philosophy is, you know, at that point, like you have been asked with very little information to push yourself past your limits, and do the best that you possibly can. And I think the idea is to just move past that and focus on the skills and the fundamentals. So while it is more rigid in the beginning, mainly because you're afraid as the candidate going through the course, but no. So you do physical events, you do PT events, and there are things that are clearly designed to make you suck and push yourself. I think one of the earliest ones I remember was The selection, or the OTC sergeant major at the time, was a guy named John Hale, who unfortunately took his life a number of years ago. One of many that I'm sure you and I both know, but Lumpy was his nickname, I think, from Somalia. But he took us on a PMask run where we had like bell-fed weapons and protective masks on and running through the sand in the, backwoods in North Carolina there outside the compound. And that was definitely a suck event. Like, we're just going to go punish you and see if these guys still got enough to keep pushing themselves every single day. But for the most part, it was focused on starting at zero and then continuing to advance your skills and education to get you to the level where they needed to be.
Would you describe it as a gentleman's course?
Gentleman's course.
There's no buffoonery. There's no hazing. There's none of that. It sounds very black and white.
Yeah. Yes, with the exception of the criticality that's placed on you on a daily basis. Like, you are in a learning environment, but it's very clear that if you make a mistake, you do X, and they explain to you, this is what you did wrong, this is how you need to do it different, or whatever that ended up being, that if you don't learn from that experience and you don't implement the corrective action that was taken, you're not going to stay here. So would I call it a gentleman's course? No. I would say it's very professionally run, but the level of detail and scrutiny is so high that comes with its own pressure where all that stuff isn't necessary.
Okay.
As you progress on and you get into CQB and you're doing single man room entry, 2-man, and you're progressively working up as you learn the fundamentals, you've got the guys on the catwalk above you, and I think every guy going through the course ends up with a nemesis. I don't know if they work it out amongst themselves or what. I was never an instructor, but it's like one guy goes, "Yeah, that's my guy," and he might. I had one in particular. We called him the AC-130 gunship because he would just hover on the catwalk and shoot 105 rounds at me. No matter what I did, I could do no right. Like, VanSant, what are you doing? Why did you do this? What? Just constant. The questions were there, but they were justified. It wasn't like they were just picking shit out like you get in a lot of Army courses where you just know they're messing with you to mess with you.
Yeah.
It was legitimate criticism. So you had to take it, learn from it, and try to not do it the next time.
What's the retention?
In the course?
Yeah.
Ooh, good question. I mean, I think we started with 15. I think we finished with 11 or 12.
Okay.
We only lost a few guys. We lost a couple of guys going through the direct support portion. We had an accident. We had a guy going through the operator training course as an operator, blew his hand off in the course, which was kind of an interesting moment. He was this is down the road in the course, but we're in full blown like team CQB at this point, and so it would be like one team would go and it was exterior breach and then move through whatever the house was or the facility was. You'd come out, do a hot wash of the events that just took place, walk back through the house and go through each room. And then it would be next team up. Well, he was outside and he was prepping his charge. He was going to be the breacher for that iteration. And we were using the old Navy West device, that dual-fired firing device. So he had it on the underside of the charge. He had screwed the no-nail into the West firing device. And he was going through his pre-combat checks. And he test-fired the West device, but he had hooked it up. And so when he did it, he had the caps and the West device in his hand, and the caps blew basically the majority of his hand off.
Shit.
And it was just a mistake. I mean, it was what the course is designed to draw out, is people that aren't capable of dealing with things coming at them from all directions and being able to be clear and concise and do the basics correct to the highest level. And Chuck blew his hand off, and we thought it was a Haddon round. We thought a guy had an AD with a shotgun or something, because it was like a muffled pop. Mm-hmm. It wasn't super loud because it was just two blasting caps detonating.
Damn.
But he did the hot potato, and the medics came over, treated him. They put him in a truck, drove him off, and the instructor that was running CQB that day basically turned to us right after the truck drove away and said, "Next team up."
Damn.
And I've told that story for years because it imprinted on me. It was like, okay, accidents happen. We need to talk about what just happened and why. a hot wash and AAR, but our job is to train and prepare for combat, and that's our focus. So we're going back to it, and we did right then and there. It wasn't like they halted training. If that happened in the conventional army, the day is over.
Yeah.
Like the range is shut down. Like nothing is going on after that. There's an investigation. Like, nope, we went within minutes. We went right back to the next team up. Explosive breach, external entry, CQB through the house.
Shit. For those listening that don't understand that, so when Chris is saying that the hand got blown off by a blasting cap is basically about the size of a Bic pen.
Yeah.
About half the size of a Bic pen. You put it into a charge, and that's what initiates the bomb to go boom.
The larger explosive, yeah.
So they say, I don't know how accurate this is because I never really fucked around with them to find out, but they say, at least in BUDS and SEAL training, they say that the blasting cap is very sensitive, and maybe that proves the point.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take a lot to set them off.
It's funny the things that happen. Like that happened, again, when I was a baby, for lack of a better term, going through the course. But I breached for a really long time when I actually got to the teams. I breached for almost 3.5 years in combat, which you're not really supposed to do for that long. And that's a whole story I'm sure we'll talk about later. But it made me very conscious of everything that I was doing and very methodical as a breacher. And I think it was important to me being successful as a breacher later on. So, yeah, even from all the bad always comes something good. And I think it made all of us better operators.
Where do you think if you started with roughly 15, graduated with roughly 10, 11, where do most guys, and then you spent a lot of time over there, where do you think most guys get caught up in OTC, in that training pipeline?
Complex environment. I think when you have so many things coming at you, like CQB is the most, as you know, like it's the most complex of all combat-related environments. You've got stuff going on in different rooms. You've got people coming from different angles. The unit is always taught multiple entry CQB, so you've got where are the good guys, where are the bad guys. When you shoot at a target, you got to know what's in front of, what's at, and what's behind my target. You've got stuff overhead. You've got stuff in your ears. You've got flashbangs. You've got door charges. It's just so many things going on at one time that I think it's just too much for some guys. And they might be able to get away with it for a little bit, but eventually it catches up to them. And I think whiteout is the right term, but whatever. It's basically just too much information for a guy to process and make sound decisions. And I think that's the dominant thing that gets guys.
Is that towards the end?
I think we lost one kind of midway that just couldn't cut it. Most of them were toward the end. And then, you go to a board at the end of OTC again, which is basically where your overall performance is assessed throughout the entire course. You can get dropped at any point along the way, but the board kind of looks at your overall performance and then takes input from all the instructors on your personality and demeanor and things like that. And squadron leadership makes decisions, and they basically pick onesies and twosies and try to figure out where the best fit for a guy is. Because like any organization, kind of each squadron within that organization has a little bit different vibe, different personality. So I've always felt like they did a really good job with guys ending up where they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
At least I felt that way. I felt like where I went was absolutely the right choice for me.
I've heard you talk about the competitive culture within the unit. And listening to your OTC experience and a couple other people's OTC experience, I could be totally off on this, but I don't hear a lot of competitiveness happening in training. Am I correct on that?
No.
No?
I mean, there is a level of camaraderie, I think, in the course because you're all going through the same things and you're in teams. So you definitely pull together with your teammates.
Okay.
Like Shawn and I are on the same team in OTC. Like I want Shawn to be successful. Shawn being successful means I'm successful. So there's an inherent camaraderie and unity that comes within that team environment. Between the teams, definitely competitive.
Okay.
They want to be faster. They want to be better. In my particular case, way late in the operator training course, they busted it all up. So I was very used to and very comfortable with the other 3 guys on my team going through the course, and we were getting very good at what we were doing as we advanced in skill set. And I was the baby on the team. I had 3 Green Berets, 3 seasoned Green Berets were my OTC teammates for the first 3 quarters of it. And then late in the game, they blew up the teams and they switched us all up. And I ended up on a completely different team with completely different set of guys. And I don't know if like they just did it to like me, like they put me on another team and it was the same 3 core guys and now me. And I had to integrate into that. Or, you know, like if it was certain guys that they did that to, or if it was just in general, they just wanted to bust it up and change it up and see how guys reacted to it. But that took a minute because we had been so competitive with that other team, you know, because we're all alphas, you're like, I don't even like that dude. Like, you know, he's too cocky. He's whatever. And one of them turned out to be a good friend of mine years later, but I thought that about one of the guys on the team that I went to. It's like, he's a cocky shit. Like, he was from range measurement. He's just one of those people. And you meet a lot of those guys in that world that they're just good at everything, and it kind of pisses you off. You know what I mean? Like I'm struggling every day, like just to be enough to keep going. Like that's how I always felt. And then you look at some guys, and you get to know them years later, and you find out that that's not true. That they were having those same mental struggles that you were.
Yeah.
But from an outsider looking in, maybe they're a little older, maybe they've done a little more, maybe they handle a little better, whatever. But you look at them and you're like, man, fuck that guy. Like, he's just good at everything we do. Meanwhile, I'm out here coming in on Saturday, coming in on Sunday, like just trying to get by. And I think I felt like that joining that team. So it took a minute, but it was a good experience to be pulled out of everything that you know and that comfort and shoved back into something else and still having to be effective and meet the standard.
Interesting. Yeah, I had no idea. I was wondering, I've always heard that I worked with a lot of guys from CAG over at when I was contracting at the agency, and I could feel the competitiveness from those guys. And I think all of them are very ultra competitive, but and then get into the interviewing game. I hadn't heard about the competition in OTC.
Yeah.
So I was wondering where that kind of developed.
Well, and then it's anything that's individual. Super competitive. Running the O course, either one. They post your times.
Okay.
So you get to see, I'm number 14.
Okay.
Or I'm number 1.
Yeah.
And they do the same thing with shooting competitions. Do a couple of evaluations along the way, and it's all to prepare you for the culminating stuff. But you see your standing, the upper body round robin, or the sequence of events that you do for physical fitness. And it's changed. I don't even know what they do now. They do a bunch of different shit. But then it was like 10 or 11 events. And they had a metric in each one of those, and then an overall encompassing score. So not only did they post how you did in each one of those individual metrics, but they posted your overall score, and they racked and stacked you as a class, and they did that periodically. And so, yeah, it was very competitive when it came to that kind of stuff.
Did you guys do peer evaluations?
Ooh. I don't know. I honestly don't remember, Shawn.
Okay.
We did counseling once a month where you had a cadre member that was like your team's lead guy, and he would counsel you on, you know, sustains, improves, whatever. I don't think we did peers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And maybe I don't remember because I went through the SFQ course eventually too, later on, which is weird, and peers were a huge part of that. But I don't think we did.
Okay.
Yeah, not that I remember.
Interesting.
I'm sure somebody that listens to this will comment in and go, yes, you do, or no, you don't, and how do you not remember that? But that's whatever, man.
Yeah. That's one thing that always kept me in check. We did that in BUDS. We did that in SQT. We did that at the team. And having an instructor evaluate, that's heavy. Having your fucking team evaluate. We did it, I think it was in BUDS. I just want the top 5 guys and the bottom 5 guys and the reason why you placed them there. And I've been in the bottom and I've been in the top.
Yeah.
And that's fucking humbling.
Well, I always just wanted to finish in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
In any one of those things. Like, I had some strengths. Like, I could run. I was one of the top 2 fastest guys in the class. So I had, like, me and another dude used to battle out for second place. There was another guy who was a former Navy diver who was an ultra marathoner and held the Badwater record for some years.
Nice.
Here in the U.S. Mike is a fucking outstanding human being, but we were always 1 and 2, so I had some strengths, like shooting wise. Like I was a speed guy. I was good anytime I didn't have to like sit there and think about it. That's why I was never like a long gun or a long range shooter guy. So all the fast drills with rifle, I did well at. All the fast stuff with pistol, I did well at. You put me on a 25 meter range, slow fire with a 45, good God. You know, and I got better. Thank God people are good at teaching. But I just, whatever it was, man, I would get in my head and I'd be at the bottom of the pack, and it was terrifying. Like, so I was always just shooting to kind of be middle of the road, going through the course. Yeah.
I understand that. 45, were you guys using 45?
Yeah. We learned on 45s then.
No shit.
Yeah. I think they've switched to 9mm, but I'm not sure.
1911s?
Yeah, 1911s. Yeah, we
Nice.
Caspian 45s then. Yeah, I mean, great guns. Loved it to death. I'm glad that I learned on a full frame 45, because I think you understood the fundamentals of mechanics better, and it made you better at shooting everything else, because everything else, frankly, was just easier.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I wouldn't have thought of that. Good stuff. Also, Delta is the only unit that I know of, especially in the tier 1 side of the house, that, I mean, they recruit from everywhere. They don't
Yeah.
care. As far as I know, I'd heard you say that there are minimum requirements to try out, but it doesn't sound like the requirements are very high. You can come from, correct me if I'm wrong, anywhere in the military, Navy, Marine Corps, Army, Air Force, Coast Guard.
That's never
Maybe,
happened to my
maybe
knowledge,
not.
but maybe you can. I don't know.
But I always found that interesting, because everywhere else there's a pipeline to get into, even with regular soft.
Sure.
You know, in most organizations. Did you find that? I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And why do you think they do that?
Why do I think they allow you to come from anywhere?
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, your individual drive, your personal traits, your attributes, the way your mind works, I think are really what make the difference between a competent and solid operator and a guy that can't do the job. I think with the right mindset and the right individual, you can teach a monkey to shoot. It's just repetitive action. It's practice. It's over and over and over again. But a guy has to have the drive and the motivation. He has to have that personal thing inside him that makes him want to work that hard and be receptive to that training. So I think yes. From that perspective, I think two, I think you get pulling guys from all walks of life, for lack of a better term, I think gives you perspective from so many different angles, and they're all bringing something different to the table. And I had experiences with it later on in my career where I was working joint service stuff, where I was working with an Air Force guy or a SEAL or whatever. And there were things in their background and experience that they brought to the table that I had no clue about. Mm-hmm. And because of that influence and that input, it made us collectively even better. So I think that was the unit philosophy early was, hey man, a guy might be a vehicle mechanic, but he has the aptitude and the drive and the intelligence to be trained to do all these other things. Well, now you end up with a dude at the other end of the pipeline that not only is an operator, but he can take apart and put back together an engine.
Yeah.
That might come in handy at some point.
Absolutely.
I mean, one of the things they always stressed in the organization was you can go do anything you want, training-wise. If you can dream it up and you want to go do it, you want to learn it, whatever it is, all you have to do is explain how it's going to make you a better operator. And we will support it, fund it, and send you to that training. And in peacetime, guys did crazy stuff all the time. You know, things that you would never think of. Going to a photography course, you know, lockpick school, learn how to fly, like whatever it was. If it made you a better operator and you could demonstrate that to command, they supported it. So I think that was the philosophy going in, was you're pulling people from all different walks of life, background, experience, training, and that could be beneficial down the road.
Interesting. I hope nobody's taken that as a hit on the unit. It's just always found it fascinating that, you know, it is arguably, subjectively, whatever you want to call it, one of the most capable unit in the fucking world. And there is no standard. They don't care how much combat experience you had. They don't care what unit you came from. I mean, they know what the fuck they're looking for. That's for damn sure. And if they did have those stipulations to get in, then look at all the gems that they have, including
Yeah.
yourself. That
Yeah, I mean, there's a baseline, right? Like minimum time and service requirement, minimum rank. Those are kind of the admin ones. Minimum physical fitness standards. You know, you have to do X on your physical evaluation, whatever that is, and then you have to do an 18-mile road march in a certain amount of time. Like, there's a few precursors.
okay.
IQ testing is another part of the equation where if you're just dumb, it's just not happening. You have to score fairly well on your IQ testing, and then psychological evaluation. And I don't know anything about it. It's fascinating, and I wish I could. Like, I wish. I'm glad. I mean, I guess I'm glad that they don't share it because they're really good at what they do.
Yeah.
But I think that psychological eval was as much a part of anything. It was understanding what makes you you and how you're wired, and who has the aptitude to receive all that, function in that environment, and come home and be normal. You know, I think 20 years of war have probably altered some of that.
Yeah.
But I think the assessment on the front end in determining guys that have the aptitude or capability to be successful, I think they've got it down to a science. And I think that's why the success rates after guys get through selection and then get to OTC, I think that's why they're as high as they are.
Okay.
Not to say that things don't happen after that. There's tons of guys that wash out after they're assigned a squadron. They might get through all those wickets and get to a team, and, you know, environments that you hadn't been exposed to, even in OTC, now happen, and you're just not the guy for the job, or sometimes personalities just flat out don't click.
Yeah.
And those things happen. But yeah, I think they dialed in the type of person that has the aptitude to succeed. And they've capitalized on that ever since its inception.
Okay. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So you graduate OCC.
Yep.
Who determines what squadron you're going to?
Good question. It's a bit of a draft. I think they look at all your performance metrics. I've never been a part of it, so I've never been on that side of it. But the way I've always understood it is it's, you know, whatever the pecking order is, whoever has first choice, and I think it rotates. You know, usually you're going to take the top performer in the class. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a guy that's outshot everybody, that's out this or out PT'd or whatever. There's usually a couple of guys that are up to the top in everything, a couple of guys that are all the way down to the bottom in everything, and then the rest of us are somewhere in between. And I think they just go through and pick, and then think about personalities and how the instructors describe you, and figure out where you'd be the best fit.
Damn, it's that in depth. So it's like an NFL draft.
Yeah.
Who's scouting?
Well, the instructors all come from each of the squadrons.
Okay.
So post team leader time, a good portion of team leaders rotate out into selection and training, and they become OTC instructors. So you have representation from each of the squadrons within the operator training course on the cadre side. And so they all talk among themselves, and they all talk with people back in the squadrons where they came from. And I think collectively they're charged with giving the best evaluation of who would be a good fit where. And then at the end of the day, at the board, you go through a board again, and it's the senior non-commissioned officer from each squadron, and the commander of each squadron is who's making the call on this guy or that guy based on those recommendations.
When it comes to the culture over there, I've heard different things, working with different people and interviewing different people. From what I've heard, are there squadrons that are, it seems like background plays a little bit more of a role when you get into the unit. And where I'm going with this is from what I've heard, there's a squadron that is very SF heavy, a squadron that's very Ranger heavy, and a squadron that's very mixed bag of nuts heavy. And that's all I've heard. I don't know everything, but
Yeah.
is there any truth to that?
I mean, I've heard that too. But then over the years, there's guys that I thought were guys that came out of regiment, and turns out they were Green Berets, and vice versa. Or guys that I thought were Green Berets, and they came from the regular Army, and I had no idea. I think it's pretty much a mixed bag.
Okay.
I think each squadron had different personalities for sure. My personal opinion is during my time, which is small compared to a lot of guys. You know, I was there for 9-10 years or whatever, and so I only have my own sampling. but like I was a C Squadron guy, and I always felt like C Squadron was a little more laid back than at the time the other two. Or, there's 3 now, 4 total now, but I felt like they were a little more laid back. I felt like they were a little more cerebral, a little more open to everybody's input plays into the decisions. And then I felt like there were other squadrons that were a little more like Ranger Regiment. Like the older guys have the say, and they were a little more gruff, or maybe a little more competitive. But I mean, we're talking nuanced stuff. Like they're all the same.
All right.
I really think, as much as I think I ended up in the right place, there's plenty of examples where guys have bounced between different squadrons and had no issue. You just adapt to the environment that you're in now, and that's part of what makes them great is they can do that. But yeah, I don't know if the actual numbers are different amongst the squadrons, if that was ever a thing or if that is a thing. But mine, C Squadron, was a mixed bag.
Was it?
Yeah, we had guys from regiment, we had guys from Green Berets, we had guys from regular Army, like you name it. We had guys from other services eventually. Had a couple Marines in my squadron at one point. The Marine Corps is the only weird one because the Marine Corps won't let those guys go. So they're still technically Marines.
No shit.
Yeah. If you come from the Navy and end up making it through selection and you make it, they out-process you from the Navy and in-process you to the Army and give you an Army specialty skill or whatever, MOS. The Marine Corps holds on to them so they can pull them back at any point.
Interesting.
At least that's the way it used to be. I don't know if it's still that way, but
yeah,
because I think Keith Oakes was the first. Gunny Oakes was the first guy from like force that I was aware of that came over.
Okay.
And then there's only ever been one Dev Group guy that did it, and he had a break in service. It wasn't like he left Dev and came to the unit. He left Dev, got out, did some things. 9/11 happened, and he went, "How do I get back in the fight?" And then some buddies of his said, "You need to go to CAG, man. Like, you need to go to the unit." And it's a long, funny story that you should probably interview him at some point. But he ended up going through and making it, and then ended up in the Army. To date, I think he's the only Dev guy that ever has done both. But I think there's been a few other guys from the SEAL community that have done it over the years.
Yeah. Is anybody that you know of switched the other side?
Not that I'm aware of.
No?
Yeah. And I don't even know.
Everybody's happy over there, huh?
I don't even know how you would do it. I mean, like, there's a mechanism on the unit side to do that. I don't know that there's a mechanism to go the other way.
Interesting.
But and that relationship ebbs and flows over time.
Yeah.
We were like this for a bunch of years, and then the exchange between the two organizations, that Stan McChrystal did in the early 2000s, that improved a lot of things and made both organizations better, and we got along a lot better. So there's a generation of us from that like early 2000s combat era where we're all really good friends.
Yeah.
I don't know about now. Maybe it's gone back to the, fuck those guys. I don't know. But it was a funny evolution, and for my peer group at least.
So back to your own experience. You get in, you go to C Squadron.
Yeah.
What is that environment like?
Super fast.
Is it welcoming?
Nobody was there. So C Squadron was deployed to Afghanistan when I crossed the hall, as they say. So the initial stuff happened right after 9/11. That was a different squadron that did Gecko and all those early incursions into Afghanistan. The next rotation, C took over for them. So in the spring of 2002, the squadron I got assigned to deployed. So when I finished OTC and went to C Squadron, I didn't even go to Halo School then. Part of the pipeline was after OTC. If you hadn't been, you went to Halo School and some advanced demolition stuff. And I didn't even do those because I got to Squadron. They basically in-processed us. There was a skeleton crew left there. They equipped us, and then in less than 2 weeks, I was on a plane headed to Afghanistan.
Oh, so you met them
Met
overseas.
my team in combat. Yep.
Shit.
Straight out of school.
How... That could be... yeah. That could be tough. They could be either very welcoming because they need you, or they could be, who the fuck is this guy showing up mid-deployment? How was it?
Mixed bag.
Yeah?
The team, fantastic. The team was great. And I think they were all adult enough, experienced enough, and smart enough to know that tonight this guy could be on our left or our right. So it behooves us to be accepting, get him up to speed anywhere that he's not, make sure he's equipped properly, et cetera, et cetera. So the team that I went to was very welcoming. All of them are still longtime friends to this day. Like, they were just really, really good dudes. The troop, so expanding out a little bit, yeah, sure, there's some practical jokes and some things that occur, and like, who is this guy? But at the end of the day, it was minimal. And I think it was because they were at war. Like, they were forward deployed and, okay, you're part of this, let's go. We don't know when our next hit's going to be. I think I got lucky that, again, timing, that my first deployment was Afghanistan, because back then it wasn't that bad. Like, they only did like 6 or 8 hits that entire rotation. I got there about midway through it. So I only did like 4 mission sets.
Really?
So I got some training time. Yeah, we did like a recce mission. My first thing with the team was a low vis, basically walk-in hit. And yeah, blew a bunch of doors, threw some flashbangs, didn't pull the trigger. I didn't pull the trigger once that first rotation to Afghanistan. So I got to integrate with the team. I got to learn. I got to realize how slow I was. Smash into a Afghani door and bust the bridge of my nose and pop the nods off my helmet on my very first target ever. Like, there's a lot of little moments in there. But being at war, joining that organization and a team at war, it was the stuff that you can't get in OTC. It was like, I'm on target in combat, hunting bad dudes, and your troop sergeant major's on the radio and he's deadpan calm. Roger that. This is 2-2. Blah 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 blah. You didn't even get that in the regular army in training. They'd get all fired up when you were at JRTC. Fake stuff going on, and it was just it was a really good way and a very real way to join something like that.
When you got to Afghanistan, that's a real, I don't know how long were you there? Or how long was the deployment, if you can say?
Oh, their deployment was, well, some guys were there prior doing AFO stuff, but the squadron as a whole, I think, was there for 3.5 months.
3.5 months?
And I only caught like the tail end, so like a month and a half of that.
Maybe 8 hits in 3.5 months. Were you expecting more when you got there?
Yeah, I was.
Were you disappointed?
No.
No?
No. We did enough that, because don't get me wrong, like, I was nervous and every night out, like, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Even though the guys had said, like, some things that happened, there was a couple little things that had happened. But yeah, I wasn't disappointed. I felt like we got to do a little of a bunch of different things. There was some funny stuff that happened, but I felt like I got to integrate with my team and get to know those guys. Because, on a deployment, you get to know people on a different level. Mm-hmm. It's not like being home stateside where you go home every night. Like, you're with them 24/7. So for me, I was really grateful, like, for the way that it all worked out. Just getting to know those guys on that level, being forced to get up to speed as quickly as possible. Because you come at OTC and you think you're hot shit, and then you get there and you realize, oh my God, I had no idea how good these guys were at this, and I feel like they didn't teach me anything again. And so yeah, but yeah, you quickly adapt and become a part of it, and then we I think we redeployed in like July timeframe, shortly after July 4th, and then that summer was basically when the churn started for prepping to potentially invade Iraq.
Before we go to Iraq, you showed up in a combat zone at the most capable unit in the fucking world. Probably nervous.
Terribly.
Nervous that the team's not going to like you, nervous that you're going to combat.
Yeah.
Usually, from my own experience, when I see people show up mid-deployment, including myself, I've done it, and you're new, you're usually drawn to one particular person that kind of takes you under their wing.
Sure.
What was that for you?
Yeah, it was Brad Thomas. If folks out there have heard Brad's name, Brad started the band Silence in the Light. 100% of the proceeds from their music goes to charity. And Brad, I was from Delaware. Brad was from Maryland. Brad was a Somalia vet. 93 was in BCO 375 during the Black Hawk Down incident on October 3rd. and lived through all that, and then hung around and eventually became a unit operator. And like he'd been through some stuff. And so I looked up to him right away. He sort of took me in right away, and we were pretty tight back then. Like I looked up to him like a big brother, still do to this day. But my whole team then, like all those guys were just solid and very helpful, and all a little different in their own way. And yeah, we all do a pretty good job of hanging on even all these years later. Like that first team, we were together in combat for multiple rotations after that. And that didn't happen later on. Like guys would come and go or get injured or whatever. But yeah, that core group of like 4 guys I was with for 3 or 4 combat rotations. And yeah, Brad was always kind of there as a mentor.
What was one of the biggest lessons you've learned, or you learned on that deployment, maybe through humiliation? Like, fuck, I can't believe I just did that. Did you make any of those mistakes on that first deployment?
I think the biggest lesson for me was trust your instincts. So I was on a rooftop, my very first target. Like I said, I'd already busted my nose and torn my nods off my head and whatever, tried to put them back together. But we were on the rooftop pulling security, and I was like right side security looking like north down this road. I think we had some Rangers in a couple blocking positions, or maybe the recce troop guys. We had some snipers or something out. And again, no shots fired, but we had aggressively taken this target down and secured some detainees, and we're just waiting to exfil basically. And this guy came running down the road with an AK, and I was the only one that saw him. And I said to Mikey, a teammate of mine, I said, hey, there's a dude running down the road with an AK. And something about it just didn't feel right. Like he wasn't like he was running to get in the fight. It was like he was running to come look or like see how he could help. There was just something about his body language. And again, I'm a brand new guy in combat. And I said, so this guy running down the road with an AK. And Mikey, not looking in that direction, goes, so shoot him. Well within my rights, right?
Yep.
He's coming into our target area, rules of engagement. I was good. Totally could have smoked that guy. It just didn't feel right. And so I yelled back. I go, I don't think he needs to be shot. And then Mikey, being, a solid dude, I think radioed down, said, hey, there's a dude coming up the street. Because I'm, oblivious. Radioed down to the guys on that corner and said, there's a guy coming up the street with an AK. Well, they ended up stopping him. They didn't shoot him. They just stopped him. He was like the local law enforcement. He was actually friendly to us and a guy that had worked with, U.S. forces over there. And he just heard all the noises and commotion and thought somebody was in trouble and he needed to come help, and he was coming down the road to investigate. So nothing wrong with that dude. I would have been well within my rights to smoke him, but he's hopefully still alive today because I trusted my gut and I didn't just do the instinctive thing, which is guy with a gun running into the target area, pull the trigger.
Well, good for you.
So it stuck with me most of the time throughout the rest of my deployments. That served me well. There's a couple instances that I regret not pulling the trigger. But yeah, for the most part, it taught me to trust my gut.
Where do you regret not pulling the trigger?
Years later in Iraq, we hit a target in Fallujah, and we were chasing a bomb maker, and we didn't know really anything about him. We had like a name, we had no image, we didn't know age, like none of that stuff. We had some familial tie and a name, and we hit this house, and there was a bunch of people in the house. And when I made entry into the room, across the room there was a doorway, and this kid, to me, I mean kid, baby face, and I was a baby face guy and a young guy at the time, and I wouldn't have guessed he was but 14 years old. But he reached down and grabbed an AK, and I basically went from the high ready to on him to off safe, and I yelled, "Don't do it!" And he threw the AK on the ground. Like he got to like here, and then he like saw me, and then he threw the AK on the ground, and I went straight at him across the room as the guys fanned out. And I think I pushed him initially, and he fell down, and then I kicked him a number of times, and I was amped up because I almost had to shoot, in my mind, this kid, and it was because he picked up a gun for whatever reason. So I was mad at him, so I was kicking him, not like really aggressively, just like, I can't believe you would do that kind of thing, you know what I mean? And another teammate grabbed me and was like, hey, it's cool, and we picked him up and flex cuffed him or whatever, and then went on with the target. Well, it turns out, so that dude he was just a young baby face guy, but he was like the area expert on IED construction.
Shit.
And he had been building bombs, and they had this garage facility where they were building those bombs and blah, 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 blah. But they put him not us, another group of guys put him in a vehicle the next day to take him out and do a close target reconnaissance and get him to point out where all these facilities were after interrogation and all that. He said he would show them where all their stuff was. And it's in Fallujah, broad daylight. He's in the back of the van. They cuffed his wrists, so he's in the back of the van with his wrist cuffs, but they didn't cuff him to the vehicle. So he leads them through the market in downtown Fallujah. There's thousands of people out on the street, broad daylight, and he goes, "See that building right there?" And the dudes that were in the truck all turned and looked to the right, and he slid the window open and hopped out, ran into the crowd. So the guys got out of the vehicle. They pursued him for like 10 feet and then realized they're in a crowd of 1,000 Iraqis, and they're the only gringos standing in the market. So they thought better of it and they let him go.
Shit.
And so my mind for years with that one was like, I don't know how many more people that dude killed. Like, how many more people his bombs killed, how many more people he taught how to make bombs. And I carried that one around. And I don't disagree with my decision to pull the trigger. Like, especially then, like he was starting to become a threat, and then he chose not to be. And I gave it the benefit of the doubt. I did what the good guys do. And I didn't shoot him. But yeah, I carried that and went, man, who knows? Like, should I have shot that guy? Like,
Yeah.
He gave me the opportunity. I would have been well within my rights. He picked that weapon up like he was going to use it. I just gave him a split second long enough to get rid of it, and he didn't get shot.
Damn. What year were you guys in Afghanistan?
That was 02.
02? Oh,
Yeah.
shit. This is very early.
Yeah, that was super early. Yeah, that was like OIF 1. Like I said, C Squadron was like this. I think they were the second rotation from our unit to go over.
Okay.
B Squadron had done Gecko prior.
So 8 hits. I don't know how target rich that environment was at that particular time. I was still in training, but I would think there would be a lot of targets. What was special about those 8 targets to send a tier 1 asset after
Good
them?
question. And I don't even remember. At one point we laughed. At one point we did a route reconnaissance.
Okay.
Yeah. And I remember the older guys all bitching that you're sending the most highly trained individuals in the world to do a route recon to confirm if a bridge is out or not.
Shit.
Looking back, hindsight, I think it was a combination of things. We had limited assets at that point. Our collection capability was nothing like it was several years later. We didn't have eyes overhead. We had like a P3 Orion at 10,000 feet because of the hard deck was like 9,500 feet because they were worried of Stinger missiles and all that stuff. Like, it was a real early time. And I think they were coming up with stuff to do. So, like, before I got there, they did some joint stuff with the Kiwis, with New Zealand SAS, like some mobility stuff down south. We did a route reconnaissance. We did a recce mission where we inserted and like went up in the hills and did some observation. We did a couple of hits, and the hit was like a low vis hit. So for me, I was like, this is cool. Like, I'm in low vis is the funniest term ever, right? It's white guys in body armor and civilian clothes. We're low vis,
Yeah.
In Tacomas or whatever, Hiluxes or whatever. I just think, I think there was limited intelligence. I think there was limited things to do that early, and they just didn't know where guys were. So this is post.
Where were you guys at that early?
All over. So we were in Bagram. We flew down the coast and did some stuff down there. We drove up through Jalalabad to Asadabad, and we were in Asadabad for a little bit.
Were all these fobs like stood up already?
Just starting to stand up. So
Okay.
Jbad was a safe house. Asadabad was a small fob. I don't remember what was down south, and then Bagram was small but growing.
Shit.
But yeah, like Tora Bora and all that stuff had happened just before all that. So everybody went to ground after Tora Bora, like when all those events happened. So I think we were there right in that time when there was just nothing. Everybody went to Stone Age. Nobody knew where anybody was. We'd killed a bunch of guys early on and dropped a lot of bombs, and the targets dried up. So yeah, there wasn't a lot to do.
No shit.
Yeah. So like guys when I got there, like dudes that had been there AFO for months and were involved in Tora Bora and, the John McPhee's of the world, Sheriff of Baghdad and all those cats. Like I remember thinking how badass that was. Like these dudes had just been out here. We flew into Coast and there was a couple dudes that had been there for like months, like living in this shithole, with like a tent, and they would get rocketed every night. They had a joke about if they lit a fire, they would get mortared or rocketed. And so one night they cracked a bunch of chem lights and threw them in a pile where they still got a rocket. But yeah, I remember looking up to those guys, and they were raggedy and dirty and had huge Afghani beards, and I can't even grow beards still to this day. But I remember thinking, man, those dudes been here a long time. Like, they've been getting after it. And then we finished up at the end of that rotation and went home, and I was like, man, that was a lot different than I thought it was going to be. But yeah, no, but looking back, no, it was good. Like, I got to integrate with the team. Yeah, I can't imagine joining a team in combat in 05, 06, 07. Like, that would have been a completely different experience.
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick break.
Okay.
And when we come back, we'll get into Iraq.
Cool.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies,
They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
There's a secret government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own funding mechanism that's above the law and free from the law itself. That's something that most people have to understand first off here.
U.S. officials have confirmed to ABC News that another high-altitude object was shot down Sunday afternoon.
You've briefed every president since Bill Clinton on the subject of UFOs.
Oh my gosh, dude.
What we're dealing with is not a sanctioned or even a normal black project. And I can say this with authority because I am working now with people who literally manage the black budget of the United States.
This morning, questions after more unidentified objects are discovered over U.S. and Canadian airspace.
You have 3 personal friends that have been assassinated since, I believe, May 9th of 2001.
This is a patriotic duty given what is at stake and how intact is the constitutional government of the United States.
How do you have that much money unaccounted for?
They say, it costs $2 billion a plane to make the B-2 Stealth. It's about $150 million. The rest of it goes through the back door into these unsanctioned projects that neither the president nor the Congress knows. Never mind the American people.
Dr. Greer, welcome to the Shawn Ryan Show. All right, Chris, we're back. You just did a pump in Afghanistan, your first one at the unit. You come back, now you're going to Iraq. How long did you come home for before you're heading over to Iraq?
Yeah, we got home in July. I think by mid-fall, we were in full-blown. We knew that we were potentially going to invade Iraq, and we were doing a full-blown, prep training for doing a long-range desert mobility and invading the country. And then I think we deployed in February of 03 to RR Saudi Arabia, which was our staging point to kick off the invasion.
No shit. How did that feel, knowing that you're going to go be on the initial front for invading a country?
Wild. Yeah, we were excited. One, there was the historic nature of it. So take away all the sides of going to war or not going to war. When you train to be a part of one of the most elite organizations on the planet, it's like practicing to play in a football game. You want to play in the football game. So we were pumped. We were excited. We were excited that we were chosen to be the force that did that particular mission set. There was some legacy there. So The unit had done long-range desert mobility in the first Gulf War, basically hunting scuds in the western desert of Iraq to try to eliminate that threat and Saddam's ability to influence things outside of the country and shoot those missiles into Saudi Arabia and other countries. In this particular case, it was a different mission set, but along the same lines. So we were basically hunting WMD throughout the western desert. Current intel believed, and hindsight does a lot of things to the Iraq war, you and I both know. But at the time, we firmly believed that he had some type of WMD in whatever form. We assumed it was chemical at that time. And that if he was going to have it, that it was going to be stored not in Baghdad or Tikrit, but it was going to be outside of the city in one of their outstations of their ammo supply points that were moving west out of Baghdad and into the western desert. So yeah, we were excited, nervous, I think. But the legacy piece, you know, having been done in the first Gulf War, and then, you know, the last time a desert mobility was done prior to that was like way back in World War II, like in North Africa. So it was a pretty neat thing to train and prepare for. It was different. It's not like you covered desert mobility in OTC. You know, I think I probably had as much experience as anybody in that, you know, I had done that rotation to Kuwait with a mechanized unit. So I personally, I understood what it was like to be out unsupported in the middle of the desert and crossing long distances. So yeah, I was super pumped and excited for it. The weird part was when I got to our Saudi Arabia, here's our universe discussion right here. So when I got to our Saudi Arabia, there were two other units that were co-located with us. One was some components of 3rd Ranger Battalion, one of which was Charlie Company, 3rd Ranger Battalion, which is the company that I was a part of.
No shit.
The other was one company from the 82nd Airborne Division, which were accompanying like a HIMARS detachment or something else, but it was Alpha Company 2nd 325.
Damn.
So literally 2 of the 3 other organizations I had ever been a part of were all in that same spot at that point in time in history. And I've thought about that over the years. I'm like, what are the odds? If I'd have stayed in 3rd Ranger Battalion and, I don't know what I would have been at that point, probably a squad leader or something, but I would have been right there. If I would have stayed in Alpha Company 2nd 325, I would have been right there. Like,
damn.
That's a really weird...
That is crazy.
Yeah. So I think that even at the time, I think I took that like, this is where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be doing. And I think I had a lot more, at least personal confidence going into that than I did going to Afghanistan, because I had deployed once. I'd gotten to know my team. I felt like we had trained and prepared very well for that, and we were ready to go.
How long were you there before you guys crossed the border?
A couple weeks, I think. Yeah. It was not a very good, it was a kind of miserable existence. They slowly but surely shoved a bunch of people into that area, and we didn't have the support structure to do it. So like in the beginning, we had like 4 porta potties for like 400 dudes. So they were literally overflowing. Yeah. It was disgusting. It was cold. Like the weather wasn't great. It was winter still out in the desert. Yeah, but I think it was a couple of weeks before we got our like last mission brief and speech from the JSOC commander, and off we went.
Damn, I can't even imagine the anticipation of, I mean, is it going to be today? Did you guys know when it was going to be?
No, like the exact day. No, I, not that I recall in the beginning. I mean, they would do team leader meetings and stuff every day, and they would talk about things, but I don't remember us having a hard date till shortly before we left. But like I said, we weren't there that long. There's in most of the portions of that border between Iraq and Saudi Arabia, there's a double berm system. That's really all that separates it. It's not like there's fencing or anything else. And so there's 2 berms, and then at various intervals with miles and miles between them are Iraqi outposts that are like towers, where they would post, Iraqi military guys to sort of keep watch on the border. So we knew we had to cross those 2 berms. We were going to do it in between outposts. That aviation assets, helos, 160th guys, were going to take out the 2 outposts on either side and a radio communications point to hopefully silence their ability to say, hey, someone has crossed into our country.
How did it go?
Good. Yeah, like we started out, I think we drove most of the first night just getting to the border from where we were. So we spent a night out in the desert in Saudi Arabia where we all just sort of bagged out. And it was really cold. Like I think we got a little snow that night. Like nothing that stuck, but you're in the middle of the desert and it snows. And it reminded me of, I read SAS guy Andy McNabb's book, Bravo 20. And he talks about it in that before their incident where they got snow. And I remember thinking, wow, that's weird. Like, you don't expect to get snowed on in the desert. But yeah, we had a little snow. It was cold. We had every piece of snow gear we owned on. I was driving most of the time, like as a newer guy on the team. I drove the Penske, the six-wheeled unarmored vehicle that our team was on. And we had an ATV in our team as well. So I drove the Gower. In this case, Brad drove the ATV, and we would rotate positions. He and I driving one or the other, because you couldn't drive the ATV every night because we had thumb throttles.
Yeah.
And you'd get that jello thumb from holding that throttle down all the time. But yeah, we spent the night in Saudi Arabia, moved up to the berm. They had done some aerial reconnaissance, and they had found a bulldozer that was sitting all by itself in a location on the Saudi Arabian side. Who knows who it belonged to. But we had mechanics with us, which is interesting too. But in order to support our element, we needed that technical expertise. So those guys invaded right along with us on our vehicles.
Nice.
And they hot-wired the bulldozer and used the bulldozer to plow down enough of the berm that we could drive the vehicles over. And so after they had finished plowing the berm, we kind of coordinated efforts. 160th came in, and all we heard, was the calls over the radio. But they basically smoked the two guard towers on either side, and we drove into Iraq.
Did you start engaging people?
No. So we didn't.
How long did it take?
I don't remember if it was the first night or the second night. So we had a series of targets planned along the way. We would drive all night, basically under night vision. We had some other technology on our side, like we had ground-based FLIR balls at the time. And
Wow.
it was the first time they were used. Other than that, it was like helos and aircraft and stuff like that. But they didn't have them on ground-based vehicles. And so we actually had them on I think we had 3 total for the squadron. And my vehicle was one of the ones with the FLIR. So I had this big LCD screen between me and Chili, who was the team leader at the time. And he was sitting in the TC seat, in the passenger seat of the Gower. And so I could see everything he looked at with the FLIR ball. So that was nice. But either the first or second night, we had bedded down for our rest over day site. So we'd find a wadi or a depression or something to hide in, put camo netting out, put out security, and then get some rack for the day, eat some chow, etc. And we woke up to anti-aircraft fire. Like boom, 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 boom. And it went on for like 30 minutes. And it sounded like it was just over like the next rise, like it was really close. And that was probably the first, like, okay, we just invaded a country and we're at war. And it won't be long before we're involved in something. And I think if we had a big fear during all that time, it was that we were in unarmored vehicles.
You guys were in unarmored vehicles?
No armor whatsoever.
All that technology, and you had unarmored. Why did you have unarmored vehicles?
Because the platforms were built for long-range desert mobility.
Okay.
We had a lot of guns. Like I think our defense was, we're going to put more stuff in your direction than you can put in ours. We had some anti-tank weapons, that we brought with us. We had some crew serve stuff on top of each one of the vehicles. But yeah, unarmored vehicles, there really wasn't an option other than that to cover that kind of distance, and we were having to drive thousands of miles.
Yeah, I guess, I guess IEDs weren't like a huge thing then.
No, it wasn't even on the radar yet. And we were literally driving across the desert. It wasn't like we were on roads. Like we were navving across open desert.
Okay.
And then, so that anti-aircraft fire that first morning, and then shortly after, I think we hit our first target, which was an Iraqi outpost, an ammo supply point. So it was basically just like you see at airfields, like in the U.S., where they have like all of the bunkers all over. It was one of those that was used for storing ammunition. And yeah, we did a hit on basically the guard outpost where they were. It was the first time some shots were fired, and I was driving, so I drove up to the target house. Some stuff happened in the beginning, and some couple of Iraqi guards were shot, and then we made entry into the facility, but it was minimal skeleton crew out there. And then we proceeded to clear basically every bunker in the ammo supply point looking for WMD, so doing what we were tasked to do. And that sort of continued for a while. We did that at numerous locations. some with a little more activity than others. In a lot of cases, we would pull up short, use the flare ball, and call in CAS, call in close air support, and drop a bunch of bombs on an objective before we would move in. So different mindset than we were used to, you know, as a counterterrorism force or a hostage rescue force or whatever we were basically doing, you know, infantry tactic raid style missions on these compounds. So that was a little different.
Yeah.
And kind of cool just to do full, you know, the full gamut. But we definitely owned the night. We could see them miles and miles before they could see us. And we definitely had, you know, there wasn't anybody in country yet, so we had all the air assets. It was, I think we were in country for 4 days when the first volley of Tomahawk missiles and all that stuff got fired into Iraq, and when they started the push from the south. So we had been in country for a little bit and done a few things before any of the regular invasion actually started.
Damn, that's pretty fucking cool, man. I mean, that's U.S. history. Next on the Shawn Ryan Show.
Yesterday, December the 13th, at around 8:30 p.m. Baghdad time, United States military forces captured Saddam Hussein alive.
They shifted over and hit the next farm. And then, shortly after that, they uncovered the rug with the rope to the cork plug in the hole, pulled the cork out, and saw this looking down on a guy. Pulled him out of the hole, and it was Saddam.
Just hearing that and being in that place made me realize how evil that son of a bitch actually was.
Christmas Day 2003. We had caught Saddam on December 13th. This is 2 weeks later, and it was Christmas morning, and we're like, what the heck is that? And we're like listening, and we walk and we look over the balcony, and down on the lower level is these guys that work for us that are singing Christmas carols for the first time probably ever.
Damn.
In English, because they were so happy that they were in a place where they weren't going to be prosecuted for their religious beliefs.
Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.